Don't move! Don't make a sound!" Clara Bennett pressed her body over the trembling girl and felt the impact tear through her shoulder like fire. The gun had gone off. The screaming had started, and every person in that restaurant with money power and bodyguards had done the same thing. They ran. Clara had nothing. No weapon, no training, no reason anyone could explain. She just threw herself in front of a stranger and took what was coming. If this story moved you, subscribe to our channel and follow along until the very end. Drop a comment below and tell us what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story has traveled. The night was supposed to be quiet. That was the word Elena Moretti used when she begged her brother for 2 hours. Quiet. Just one dinner. One evening where nobody stood 3 feet behind her with a hand inside their jacket. One night where she could sit across a table from her older brother and feel even briefly like she was just a 20-year-old woman who happened to be eating a nice meal in a nice restaurant and not the most carefully guarded person in the state of Illinois. Damien had said no 4 times before he said yes. That was how it always went with Elena. She asked until the word no lost its meaning, until Damien looked at her face and saw something he couldn't argue against, the expression of a young woman who had spent her entire life behind walls that were built to protect her and had slowly begun to feel like a prison. So he said yes. He pulled back the security detail. He told Marco, his head of protection, to keep the men outside and at a distance. Elena wanted normal. He would give her normal. Just for one night. The restaurant was called Ilara, 43rd floor, private dining room reserved under a different name. The kind of place where a bottle of water cost $12 and the staff had signed non-disclosure agreements before their first shift. Damien had used it before for meetings that required absolute discretion. The owner owed him 3 separate favors. Nobody talked. Nobody asked questions. It was as close to invisible as a man like Damien Moretti could get. He arrived first as always. Walked the perimeter. Spoke briefly with the maitre d'. Checked the exits. Old habits that lived in his muscles rather than his mind. Then he sat down, ordered a whiskey he didn't intend to finish, and waited for his sister. Elena arrived in a gray dress she'd bought herself and heels that were slightly too high for someone who admitted she never practiced walking in them. She was laughing before she even reached the table. Laughing at herself, one hand on the wall for balance, and when Damien stood up to pull out her chair, she rolled her eyes and said, "I'm 20, not 70, and sat down on her own. He almost smiled. Almost. For the first 40 minutes it was exactly what she asked for. Quiet. They talked about small things. Elena's graduate school applications. A documentary she'd watched twice about deep-sea creatures. A joke she'd heard from someone at the coffee shop near her apartment that Damien pretended not to find funny until he finally laughed despite himself. The food came in courses. The wine was good. Elena kept reaching across the table to steal bites from his plate because she always ordered the wrong thing and never admitted it, and Damien let her take whatever she wanted because he always had and always would. He didn't think about business. He didn't think about who owed what to whom. He didn't think about the conversation he needed to have with Victor Hale on Monday morning about territory lines and a shipping agreement that was beginning to fray at the edges. For 40 minutes, he was just a man having dinner with his sister. Then he saw it. Not a weapon. Not a raised voice. Not anything dramatic enough to trigger the alarm that lived permanently in his chest. Just a waiter, moving through the dining room in the way waiters moved, carrying a covered tray, wearing the uniform hair combed back expression neutral. Nothing wrong with any single piece of it. But Damien had spent 20 years reading rooms the way other men read weather patterns, and something about the angle of the man's shoulders was wrong. Something about the way his eyes moved across the room wasn't the way a man taking orders moved his eyes. It was the way a man looking for something specific moved his eyes. Damien's hand dropped below the table. He was already calculating distance exit points, the angle between himself and his sister, when the tray went down and the man's right hand came up and the entire dining room shifted from expensive and quiet to something else entirely in under 2 seconds. People screamed. Chairs scraped. Someone knocked over a wine glass, and the sound of it shattering on the marble floor punched through the air like a second shot. Elena froze. Damien was already moving, but the table between them was too wide, and there were two guests who had stood up in a panic directly in his path, and for one terrible fraction of a second, he couldn't reach her. He couldn't get there. His hand was out, and his mouth was already forming her name, and the distance between them was only 8 feet, and it was 8 feet too far. And he watched the man turn toward his sister, and he knew with absolute certainty that he was not going to make it in time. He didn't make it in time. Someone else did. She came from the left side of the room. Not running the way a person runs when they've decided to act. Running the way a person runs when they've already stopped thinking, and the body has simply taken over when something deeper than thought or calculation or self-preservation has fired in the nervous system, and the legs are moving before the mind has signed off on the decision. She was small. Her uniform was the same as all the others, but there was something worn about it, something that spoke of long hours and too many shifts and shoes that had been resoled once too often. She had dark hair pulled back fast and practical, the kind of hairstyle that wasn't chosen but assembled each morning in whatever time was available. She had a serving tray in one hand, and she dropped it without looking at it, and it clanged against the floor, and she didn't flinch. She didn't stop. She didn't slow down. She hit Elena from the side. Both of them went down hard. The sound of the impact was followed immediately by a second sound, and then by a shout, and then by the crash of something heavy, and then by a silence that lasted only a moment, but felt enormous. The kind of silence that falls after something irreversible has happened, and everyone present is catching up to understanding what it was. Damien reached them in 3 more steps. The man with the weapon was already restrained by 2 restaurant staff members who had apparently decided that their non-disclosure agreements covered this kind of situation. Marco had materialized from nowhere, or from outside, or from whatever edge of the room he had been quietly occupying, despite instructions, because Marco never actually followed instructions when they contradicted his instincts, and Damien was going to have words with him about that later, and also be grateful for it for the rest of his life. But right now, Damien was on his knees on the marble floor next to his sister, and the woman who had put herself between Elena and something she had no obligation to put herself between. Elena was shaking. She had her arms wrapped around herself, and her eyes were wide, and she was making a sound that wasn't quite crying, a high, thin sound of shock that Damien recognized from the one other time in her life that something like this had reached her, and he hated with everything in him that she was making that sound again. "I've got you," he said. "I'm here. Look at me. Look at my face." Elena looked at him, and the sound stopped, and she grabbed his arm with both hands. Then he looked at the other woman. She was lying on her side, one arm still curved protectively around where Elena had been. Her shoulder was bleeding, not lightly. Damien had seen enough injuries to read the situation quickly, and what he read was bad enough that he called for the car and for his private physician before the word ambulance left anyone else's mouth, because hospitals meant questions, and questions meant attention. And he didn't know yet who this woman was or what she was owed, but he knew that she was not going to wait 40 minutes in an emergency room. Her eyes were open. She was conscious. That was the first thing. The second thing was the way she was looking at Elena. Not at Damien. Not at the room. Not at anything that had to do with herself or her own pain. She was looking at Elena the way someone looks when the only thing they want to know is whether the other person is all right. "Hey," she said. Her voice was steadier than it should have been for someone losing blood on an expensive floor. "Hey, you're okay." Elena looked down at her. "You're hurt." "I know." The woman almost smiled. Almost. "That's fine. Are you okay? Why did you do that?" Elena's voice broke on the last word. The woman seemed to consider the question the way you consider something that doesn't quite make sense to you. Something you weren't expecting to be asked. "Because you were scared," she said. That was it. No other explanation. No context. No follow-up. Just those 4 words delivered as if they were the most complete and sufficient answer possible. Damien looked at her face. He had spent 20 years in rooms full of people who wanted things from him. He knew what want looked like at every angle and in every disguise. He knew the face of someone calculating a return. He knew the performance of selflessness when it was actually strategy. He had seen every version of the transaction dressed up as something else, and he had stopped believing in anything that didn't have a price attached. This woman's face had none of that. She was in pain. She was fighting to stay focused. And the only thing she appeared to be concerned about was the 20-year-old girl she had just pulled out of the path of something terrible. Her name he would learn 20 minutes later when he went through her employee file himself rather than waiting for anyone to tell him, was Clara Bennett. 25 years old, single, no criminal record, no affiliations, no history that connected to anything in his world. She had worked at Alara for 11 months. Before that, a diner on the north side called Patty's that opened at 5 in the morning and closed at 3 in the afternoon. Before that, a catering company that ran corporate events downtown. She had an employment gap of 4 months, 2 years earlier, that his people would later trace to a hospitalization, not hers. Her brothers, Noah Bennett, 8 years old, a condition that had required 2 surgeries and ongoing treatment, and a financial burden that explained immediately and completely why a 25-year-old woman was working 2 jobs and still wearing shoes with worn-out soles. But Damien didn't know any of that yet. What he knew kneeling on that floor was that a woman who had no reason to do anything had done the one thing that mattered. And he couldn't account for it. He was still thinking about it an hour later when Clara was in the back of his car being driven to a brownstone in Lincoln Park where his personal physician was waiting. He was still thinking about it when Elena finally stopped shaking and fell asleep on the couch in his study, wrapped in the blanket she'd kept there since she was 12. He was thinking about it at 2 in the morning when he sat in the dark with a glass of whiskey he also didn't finish and tried to apply every framework he had for understanding human behavior and kept coming up empty. People didn't do things for nothing. That was the foundational fact of his world. Every action had a motive, and every motive had a number, and if you were patient enough and smart enough and ruthless enough about following the thread, you would always eventually find the number. Clara Bennett didn't fit. He needed to understand why. He called his best investigator at 2:15 in the morning. The man answered on the second ring because that was the arrangement, and had been for 9 years. "I need everything," Damien said. "Not just the file, everything she's ever touched, everyone she's ever spoken to, every job, every address, every account, every medical record you can access. I want it by morning." "Understood." A pause. "The woman from the restaurant." "Yes." Another pause. "She did something extraordinary tonight." "I know what she did." Damien's voice came out harder than he intended. "That's why I need to understand it." The file arrived at 6 in the morning. Damien read it twice. He read it a third time. Then he set it down and sat with what it told him for a long time. There was no angle. There was no hidden connection. There was nothing in Clara Bennett's 25 years on Earth that explained her actions in terms he was accustomed to using. What there was instead was a picture of a woman who had been handed an extraordinarily difficult life and had carried it without complaint, without fraud, without looking for a shortcut or a rescue, without ever not once in 11 months of working at Alara taking anything that didn't belong to her, even on the nights she could easily have done so. The restaurant manager's notes on her were consistent. Good worker, reliable, never late, gets along with everyone. There were 3 separate commendations from customers. There was also a note from the manager that read, "Bennett tends to take on extra tasks voluntarily. Has covered for colleagues on short notice multiple times. Sometimes I wonder if she sleeps." Damien looked at the medical bills in the file. He looked at the payment history. She was paying them down $30 at a time. $30. At 2 jobs. In Chicago. He closed the file and called Victor Hale. Victor answered on the first ring, which meant he was already awake, which was typical. Victor was always awake. Victor had been awake and running before Damien arrived in the morning his entire career. He was 61 years old and had worked alongside Damien's father for a decade before Damien took over, and there was not a single operational detail of the organization that Victor didn't know. He was organized, strategic, unflappable, and loyal to the bone, or so Damien had believed for 15 years. "Last night," Damien said. "I heard." Victor's voice was measured, careful in the way it always was. "Is Elena all right?" "She's fine. The waitress is in recovery." He paused. "I need to know how someone got into that room." "That's what I've been working on since midnight. The reservation was under a different name. The guest list was closed. Nobody on the staff should have known you were there. And yet, Victor made a sound that might have been frustration. "I'll have answers for you by this afternoon. I need them before noon." "Understood." After he hung up, Damien sat with something he hadn't let himself name yet. Someone had known. The reservation was under a false name. The security was reduced deliberately internally. The restaurant owner knew, but he was a man with too much to lose and had been trusted for 7 years. The timing of the attack was too precise to be coincidence and too specific to be random. Whoever sent that man into Alara had known exactly where Elena would be, and exactly when, and exactly how exposed she would be, without her usual detail. There were very few people with access to that information. The list was short enough that when Damien ran it in his head, each name landed like a stone in still water. He didn't say any of them out loud, not yet. At 9 in the morning, Elena woke up and padded into the kitchen in his oversized sweatshirt and demanded coffee and eggs and information in that order. And Damien made her all three, because he still knew how to make eggs, even if he never did anything else useful with a pan. She sat at the counter and wrapped both hands around the mug and said without looking up, "I want to see her." "She's resting." "I know she's resting. I want to see her when she's not resting." "Elena." "She put herself between me and a gun." Elena looked up. Her eyes were steady now, clear and direct in the way they got when she'd processed something and made a decision about it. "She didn't know me. She didn't know you. She didn't know any of it. She shook her head. "I've met a lot of people in my life who said they'd do anything for me, and most of them wouldn't have moved. She moved." Damien set the spatula down. "She's not someone to be thanked and sent away," Elena continued. "I know that's probably what you're planning. Hand her an envelope. Make sure she's taken care of. Clean resolution." She looked at him with an expression that had its mother's architecture. "That's not what she deserves." "What does she deserve?" Elena thought about it for a moment. "A reason to stop being exhausted," she said finally. He went to see Clara that afternoon. She was sitting up in the room his physician had put her in, wearing a hospital gown that belonged to the house, and reading a paperback novel she must have had in her bag, because it had a cracked spine and the look of something carried everywhere. Her left shoulder was heavily bandaged, and her right hand was the one holding the book, and she looked up when he came in with the expression of someone who had been waiting but wasn't going to say so. He stood in the doorway for a moment. She looked at him the way people rarely looked at him. Not afraid, not calculating, not performing. She just looked at him the way you look at someone who has come through the door and you're waiting to find out why. "Mr. Moretti," she said. "Clara." She seemed slightly surprised that he knew her name. Then she seemed to decide it wasn't that surprising and let it go. "How's your shoulder?" he asked. "It'll be okay. Dr. Ferreira said 6 weeks and I'd have full mobility back." A pause. "He also said I shouldn't lift heavy trays for a month, which is going to be a problem. Don't worry about the job." "That's easier to say from your side of the room." She said it without hostility, just factually, with the tone of someone reporting on conditions that existed, regardless of how either party felt about them. "I'll make sure your salary continues while you're recovering." She looked at him for a moment. Something shifted behind her eyes, not quite suspicion, more like the careful assessment of someone who had learned not to accept things at face value. "Why?" she asked. "Because you were injured in my family's situation. That's not why I'm asking why you'd pay me." She put the book down slowly with her good arm. I'm asking why you're here. People like you don't personally visit employees of the restaurant you happen to be dining at. You send someone. You send a check. She met his eyes. You're here because you want something. He could have deflected. He could have given her the version of the conversation that was easier. Instead, he said, I want to understand you. She seemed to find that genuinely unexpected. There's nothing complicated about me, she said. Last night, you threw yourself in front of a weapon for a woman you'd never met. In my experience, that's not nothing. That's the opposite of nothing. Clara looked at him for a long moment. She was 20 years old and she was terrified, she said. That's the whole explanation. There isn't more to it. Most people don't respond to someone else's terror by stepping into the line of fire. Most people don't think about what they do until they're already doing it or not doing it. She looked at her bandaged shoulder. I was already doing it. Damien sat down in the chair across from her. Not because he'd decided to sit, but because the conversation had the weight of something that required it. I read your file, he said. She didn't flinch. I figured. Your brother. Something crossed her face. Not quite pain. Something more guarded than pain. What about him? She asked. How long has he been sick? Since he was 4. She kept her voice level. It's manageable now. We're managing. The bills. Are mine to handle. Clara, Mr. Moretti. Her voice didn't harden exactly, but it found an edge. I didn't go into that dining room last night because I was hoping for something to come out of it. I did it because it was the right thing to do, and I don't have a better reason than that. I'm not going to let you turn it into a transaction. He looked at her. In 15 years of running an organization built on transactions, he had never once heard someone say what she just said. What if I don't want it to be a transaction? He asked. She tilted her head slightly. Then what do you want it to be? He didn't have an answer for that. Not yet. He stood up, adjusted his jacket, did the things his body did automatically when his mind was somewhere unexpected and needed time to catch up. My sister would like to meet you, he said, when you're feeling better. Clara looked at him for a moment. Okay, she said. He nodded, turned toward the door. Mr. Moretti. He stopped. Thank you, she said. For the doctor, for not sending me to a waiting room. He didn't turn around. Don't thank me, he said. I still owe you more than this. He left. In the hallway, he stopped and stood still for 30 seconds. Then he called Victor Hale again. The investigation into last night, he said. I want you to run it separately from the regular team, just you. Nobody else sees the findings until they're in my hands. Victor was quiet for a moment. Of course, he said. After he hung up, Damien stood in the quiet hallway of his Lincoln Park brownstone and stared at the wall and thought about something he hadn't consciously thought about in years. He thought about what it felt like to trust someone completely. And for the first time in a very long time, he tried to identify the last person he had trusted that way. The list was shorter than he wanted it to be. Elena had been awake at the counter when he came back downstairs. She was on her second cup of coffee, and she looked up at him with the expression that meant she already knew most of what had happened. Well, she said. He sat down across from her. She told me not to make it a transaction, he said. Elena was quiet for a second. Then she smiled. It was a real one. The kind she only had when she wasn't performing anything for anyone. Good, Shah, she said. I like her already. You haven't even spoken to her. I know what she said when she had me on the floor. Elena looked at him steadily. While everything was happening, while she was hurt and scared and didn't know what was going on, you know what she said to me. He waited. She said, don't be afraid. Elena's voice went quiet. Not, I've got you. Not, you're safe. Don't be afraid. Like she was talking to someone she cared about. She wrapped her hands around the mug. I've had bodyguards my entire life, and not one of them has ever said anything like that to me. Damien said nothing. She's not nobody, Elena said. I don't care what her bank account looks like or what she does for a living. She's not nobody." He stayed quiet. In his mind, something was still running. The same circuit he had been running since 2 in the morning when he'd first opened her file. But underneath the investigation, underneath the calculation, underneath the part of him that processed everything as a problem to be solved and a variable to be accounted for, something else was happening. Something he didn't have vocabulary for. He had spent 20 years building walls, and in 40 seconds, a woman in worn-out shoes had walked through all of them without apparently noticing they were there. He didn't know what to do with that. What he did know was that Victor Hale's report was due in 3 hours, and that the question of how someone had known Elena's location that evening was not going to answer itself, and that somewhere in the architecture of his own organization, something had come loose, and that the woman recovering in his upstairs guest room had paid the price for it. He thought about the angle of the attacker's shoulders, the way the man's eyes had moved across that dining room. Specific, purposeful. Not the eyes of someone finding their way in a new space. The eyes of someone who already knew the layout and was looking for a single point inside it. Elena. Only Elena. Not Damien. Not anyone else at the table. The attack had been angled entirely toward his sister, not toward him, not toward the organization's money or territory or power in any direct sense. Toward the one thing he had that wasn't about power at all. Toward the one person he loved without qualification or condition. Whoever had planned this knew him, really knew him. Not his business operations, not his territory maps, not the surface layer that his enemies studied. The person behind this attack knew that Damien Moretti's weakness was not in his empire. It was in a 20-year-old girl who still stole bites from his plate and fell asleep on his couch under the same blanket she'd had since she was 12. And there were very few people alive who knew that. He went back to his office. He sat at his desk. He looked at the short list in his mind, and he began very quietly to understand something he didn't want to understand yet. 3 hours later, Victor's report arrived. Damien read the first page and set it down. He read the second page. He read it twice. He sat with his hands flat on the desk and his breathing steady, because he had learned a long time ago that breathing was the one thing you couldn't let the truth disrupt. The evidence in Victor's own report had been compiled apparently without Victor's awareness, in a way that pointed unmistakably in a direction Victor could not have intended. Because the chain of information that had led someone to Alara, to the reservation, to the timing, to Elena's reduced security, ran through a single channel. And that channel was Victor's office. Damien closed the file. He looked at the window. He thought about 15 years. He thought about the first year after his father died, when the organization had been close to collapse and Victor had stood at his right hand and rebuilt it alongside him. He thought about trust and what it meant to give it and what it meant to have it used against you by someone you had treated like family. He thought about Clara Bennett lying on a marble floor with her arm around a frightened girl bleeding from a wound she took on behalf of people she had never met, saying with absolute steadiness, "You're okay." He thought about what it meant to be that certain of your own reasons. And he thought about what it meant to have no idea, none at all, what the reasons of the person closest to you actually were. He picked up his phone. He did not call Victor. He called Marco. "I need you to come in," he said. "Just you. Tonight." "Understood," Marco said. "Is it what I think it is?" Damien looked at the file. "It's worse," he said. After he hung up, he sat in the silence of his office for a long time. Outside Chicago carried on. And somewhere in his organization, a betrayal that had worn the face of loyalty for 15 years was waiting for him to find it. But first, before any of that, he sat with what he knew. He knew that Elena was safe. He knew that the woman who had made her safe was 3 floors above him in a guest room reading a paperback with a cracked spine, paying down $30 at a time, a medical bill that should have broken her. And he knew with a certainty he hadn't felt about anything in years that whatever came next was going to be different. He didn't know how. He didn't know what form it would take. He just knew that something had shifted in the architecture of his world last night, In the moment, a woman nobody important had ever noticed had moved faster, and with more courage than everyone in a room full of power and money and armed protection. The thing she moved toward was not safety. The thing she moved toward was someone who needed her. And in Damien Moretti's world, that was either the most foolish thing he had ever seen, or the bravest. He was beginning to think it might be both. Marco arrived at 11 that night. He didn't knock. He never knocked. He had worked for Damien long enough that certain formalities had been stripped away and replaced with something more functional, a shorthand built from years of shared pressure and mutual understanding. He came through the side entrance, the one with the code only 4 people knew, and he found Damien exactly where he expected to find him, at the desk in the dark, with a file open and a glass untouched beside it. Marco sat down across from him without being invited. "Tell me," Damien said. "I've been running my own checks since this morning." Marco set his phone on the desk between them. "Independent of whatever Victor put together." He paused. "You should know that Victor called me twice today asking what I was working on." Damien looked at him. "I told him I was pulling the restaurant security footage," Marco said. "Which was true. I was also pulling the communication logs from the 48 hours before the dinner." He nodded toward the phone. "It's all there." Damien didn't pick up the phone. "Tell me what's on it," he said. Marco leaned forward with his elbows on his knees, the posture of a man who had rehearsed this in his car on the way over because he knew what it was going to cost the person he was saying it to. "The reservation at Ilara was made through your assistant's calendar. Password-protected server encrypted, accessed by 3 people regularly. You, your assistant, and Victor." He kept his voice flat and professional, the way he always did when the information was bad enough that emotion would only make it worse. "The calendar was accessed from a device that isn't yours or your assistant's at 11:14 the morning of the dinner. The access was brief, 4 minutes. Whoever went in knew exactly where to look." Damien said nothing. "The device traces to a burner," Marco continued. "But the burner was purchased at a store on Michigan Avenue 12 days ago. The purchase was made by a man named Gerald Watts. Watts has done 3 jobs over the past 6 years for a broker that your people have dealt with before. He doesn't work for himself." He paused. "He works through an intermediary." "Who is the intermediary?" Marco was quiet for exactly 2 seconds. "I need you to look at the phone," he said. Damien picked it up. He looked at the photograph on the screen. He set the phone back down. He looked at the wall for a moment. Then he said very quietly, "How long have you known?" "I had suspicion 3 months ago," Marco said. "When the Lakeshore agreement fell apart, in a way that didn't make sense unless someone had moved information ahead of the meeting. I didn't have evidence. I didn't want to bring you something I couldn't back up." He met Damien's eyes. "I should have come to you sooner. I know that." "Yes," Damien said. "You should have." Marco accepted that without deflection. The room stayed quiet. What Damien didn't say, and what Marco knew without it being said, was that the name on the phone was not a surprise in the way surprises were supposed to work. There was no shock, no disbelief. There was instead something slower and heavier, the particular weight of a thing you have been not quite allowing yourself to understand finally settling into its full shape. Like a building you've been walking around for months, suddenly being seen from the angle that shows you the foundation has been compromised the entire time. Victor Hale, 61 years old, present at Damien's father's table before Damien was old enough to sit at it himself. The man who had handed Damien his first operational briefing at 23 years old and said with complete seriousness that he believed in him. The man who had talked him down from 2 decisions that would have ended everything and had been right both times. The man who Damien had allowed himself quietly in the private language of things he would never say out loud to think of as something close to family. The man who had told someone where Elena would be. "Does he know we're looking?" Damien asked. "Not yet, but he's not patient. He called me twice. He'll start getting nervous when I don't call back." Marco paused. "We have maybe 48 hours before he does something to cover his tracks." "He won't run," Damien said. "That's not how he thinks. He'll try to shape what I know." He looked at the file on the desk. He sent me a report this afternoon, his own investigation into the attack. I know, I have a copy. What does it point toward? Away from him. Elegantly. Marco almost looked impressed, the way professionals occasionally acknowledged craft, even in opposition. If you only read his report and nothing else, you'd be looking at a completely different part of the organization right now. He's redirecting me. He's been redirecting you for 3 months. Marco's voice stayed level. Maybe longer. Damien stood up. He walked to the window and stood with his back to the room for a moment. Why, Elena? He said. It wasn't quite a question. Because you don't have a weakness that's operational, Marco said. He's been in this organization long enough to understand your architecture completely. He knows there's no lever in your business that moves you fast enough. There's no financial pressure, no territorial threat. Nothing he could take that would make you hand over control without a fight that he can't win directly. A pause. Elena moves you differently. He wanted me to hand over control. I think he wanted you to feel like you had no ground left to stand on. Marco's voice was careful now. A man who's just lost the only person he loves unconditionally is not a man who negotiates from strength. He's a man who makes concessions. Damien turned around. He's been planning this. For at least a year, possibly longer. Marco picked up his phone and stood. The broker he used, Watts' intermediary, has been paid in installments. The first installment was 14 months ago. 14 months. Damien calculated the distance between that number and his own memory. 14 months ago, he and Victor had been sitting across from each other in the same office planning the next 2 years of the organization's operations. Victor had been thorough, detailed, prepared the way he always was. He had asked good questions and offered sound strategy, and Damien had thought not for the first time that he genuinely didn't know what he would do without him. He had been planning it then. He had been looking at Damien across a desk and building the architecture of his betrayal, while Damien trusted him with the organization's most sensitive details. 14 months. I want the full file by morning, Damien said. You'll have it by 6. And Marco. He waited until the other man looked at him directly. Nobody else. Not one person in this organization gets a word of this until I decide what to do with it. Understood. After Marco left, Damien stayed in the office. He didn't sit down again. He stood at the window and let his mind run the full length of it, the timeline, the logistics, the degree of access it required, the patience it took. 14 months of planning aimed at a single evening, aimed at a 20-year-old girl in a gray dress who just wanted one dinner without bodyguards. Something moved in his chest. Something he had learned a long time ago to convert immediately into something useful. Anger that became strategy. Pain that became focus. Emotion processed and redirected before it could cloud the operational picture. He converted it. Then he went upstairs, not to his own room, to the guest room on the 3rd floor where the light was still on under the door, which meant Clara Bennett was still awake at nearly midnight, despite the fact that she had taken serious physical trauma less than 24 hours ago and should have been unconscious by 9. He knocked. Come in, she said. She was sitting up against the headboard, with the paperback in her lap, and an expression that suggested she'd heard his footsteps and known it was him before the knock. She looked at him without surprise. You should be asleep, he said. Probably. She looked at him for a moment. You should too. You look like someone hit you. He almost said something that wasn't true. Then he decided there wasn't a reason to. I got some information tonight that I wasn't ready for, he said. Do you want to talk about it? No. He said it automatically, then stopped. Because the automatic answer was the one he always gave. I don't know, he said instead. She didn't push. She just waited the way certain people could wait without pressure, without filling the silence with something easier, without any agenda about where the conversation went. She just sat there and let him decide. He sat down in the chair by the door. Have you ever trusted someone for a long time? He said, and then found out that the version of them you trusted was something they built specifically because they knew you'd trust it. She was quiet for a moment. "Yes," she said. "Not the way you mean it, but yes." "What did you do with it?" She looked at her hands. "I was angry for a long time. Long enough that I couldn't think about it without my chest going tight." A pause. "And then I was exhausted by the anger, and I let go of it. Not because the person deserved it. Because I needed the energy for Noah." He looked at her. "Your brother makes a lot of decisions for you," he said. "No." She shook her head. "He doesn't make decisions for me. He reminds me what the decisions are for." She met his eyes. "That's different." He sat with that. Outside, the city made its sounds. The ambient noise of Chicago at midnight, specific and continuous, the kind of backdrop that Damien had lived inside for so long that he didn't hear it anymore, except in moments like this one, when something quiet enough forced a person to actually listen. "The attack on my sister wasn't random," he said. Clara was very still. "I didn't think it was," she said carefully. "Someone planned it. Someone inside my organization." She didn't react with the alarm that most people would have reacted with. She didn't immediately ask if she was in danger, which he found himself noting. She just looked at him with the steady quality that seemed to be as fundamental to her as her own breathing. "Is Elena safe?" she asked. "Yes." "Are you going to handle it?" "Yes." "Then that's enough for tonight," she said. "You can't do anything about it in the next 6 hours. You know what you know. Let it sit." He looked at her. "You're very calm for someone who just found out they're in the middle of something considerably larger than a restaurant incident." "I was already in it the moment I hit that floor," she said. "Getting nervous about it now doesn't change the geometry." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Why don't you ever perform anything?" She tilted her head. "What do you mean?" "Most people, when they're in a room with me, they're performing something. Fear, respect, casualness, strategy. Everyone's running some version of the presentation of themselves." He looked at her directly. "You don't do that." She considered it. Actually considered it rather than deflecting. "I'm too tired," she said finally. "I've been running 2 jobs and managing medical bills and trying to make sure Noah has some version of a normal life for 2 years. I don't have the bandwidth to also manage how I appear to people." She paused. At some point, exhaustion just strips the performance layer off completely. "And you're left with what?" "Yourself," she said. "Which is either terrifying or very freeing depending on the day." He looked at her for a long moment. "Get some sleep," he said. He stood up. "Mr. Moretti?" He stopped at the door. "You're going to be okay," she said. "Whatever happened tonight, you're going to be okay." He didn't know what to do with that either. He nodded once and left. In his room, lying on his back in the dark, he thought about a woman who was too exhausted to perform and had therefore accidentally become the most authentic person he'd talked to in years. Sleep, when it came, was shallow and brief. He was at his desk by 5:30. By 6, Marco's full file arrived. Damien read it in 2 hours, all 47 pages, without moving and without coffee, in the specific state of focus that only materialized when the stakes were high enough to suppress everything else. The full picture was worse than the partial one. Victor hadn't only compromised the Alara dinner. Over 14 months, working through Gerald Watts and 2 other intermediaries, he had sold operational information on 3 separate occasions to parties who had used it to create pressure in Damien's territorial arrangements, pressure that had cost money, and in one case, a business partnership that Damien had spent 8 months building. Victor had sat across from him each time the consequences materialized and helped him analyze what had gone wrong. Had offered assessments. Had helped design the responses. Had, in 2 of the 3 cases, personally recommended the corrective strategies. He had created the problems he was helping to solve. And the money, the payments into accounts traced through 6 layers of corporate shell structure to a final destination that was unambiguous. Victor wasn't doing this for ideology or power or grievance. He was doing it for a number. A very large, very specific number. The kind of number that suggested a plan for what came after. A life that didn't involve Chicago. A life that didn't involve any of it. He had been building his exit while Damien's sister sat across from her brother at a dinner table trying to feel normal. When Elena came downstairs at 8:30, with her hair still wet from the shower and her coffee mug already in hand, Damien was still at the desk. She looked at him. "You didn't sleep," she said. "Enough." She sat down across from him and didn't say anything for a minute, which was unusual. Elena's silence was always purposeful. "Tell me," she said. "Elena, I'm not 12. Her voice was quiet, but it had an edge under it. "I understand the way this world works. I've lived in it my entire life. Don't decide what I can handle." He looked at her. She was right. She had always been right about that. He had spent so long protecting her from the specifics that he had sometimes confused protecting her with underestimating her, and she had, with remarkable patience, allowed that confusion because she loved him. But there were limits. "Victor," he said. The single word landed in the space between them. Elena's face didn't break. It rearranged. Something moved through it, not shock, because Elena had grown up in the same world he had, and she understood at some cellular level that trust was a finite and vulnerable resource, but something specific to Victor. Something personal. She had known him since she was 8 years old. He had come to her school performances. He had been at the table for Christmas dinners. He had on at least 3 separate occasions sat beside her during moments of fear and told her that Damien had everything under control. "How long?" she said. "At least 14 months, probably longer." She looked at the desk. "The Lakeshore thing," she said. He looked at her. "Last winter. You were distracted for 3 weeks and you didn't tell me why, but I knew something had gone sideways." She looked up. "That was him. That was him." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "He sat with me in January, when you were in New York. He came over and we had dinner and he talked about Dad." Her voice went very level the way it did when she was managing something carefully. "He asked me how I was doing. He asked if I was happy. He asked about school." She stopped. "He was checking on his investment." The word investment came out of her mouth like something she was holding at arm's length. "Elena, don't." She shook her head. "Don't do the thing where you soften it. It is what it is." She picked up her coffee. "What are you going to do?" "I'm thinking about how." "Not whether." "Not whether," he agreed. She nodded. Then she stood up and walked to the window and stood there for a moment, and Damien watched her and thought about the 20 years between the little girl he had promised his dying mother he would protect, and the young woman standing at the window, processing betrayal with more grace than he felt. "I want to see Clara today," Elena said, still facing the window. "She'll be up by 10. Good." She turned around. "She's the one real thing in all of this. The only person who did something because it was the right thing to do." She looked at him steadily. "I need to be around someone like that right now." He understood. At 10:15, Clara came downstairs. She moved carefully because of the shoulder, and she'd borrowed a button front shirt from the small collection Dr. Ferreira had left for her use, and she stopped at the bottom of the stairs when she found both Damien and Elena in the kitchen, clearly not expecting an audience. "Good morning," she said with the tone of someone who was going to be professional about this, even if professionalism required active effort. "Coffee," Elena said immediately, already moving to pour it. "Yes, please." Elena handed her the mug and said, "How's the shoulder?" "Stiff. Better than yesterday." Clara wrapped both hands around the mug and looked between them with the expression of someone taking a quiet reading of the room. "You've both been up for a while." "Since before 6, Elena said. "Bad news travels early." "Something like that." Elena sat down at the counter and looked at her with directness that was entirely characteristic. "My brother told me it wasn't random, the attack." Clara met her eyes. "I figured." "Does it scare you?" Clara thought about it with the same real consideration she seemed to give every question. A little, she said. But I'm not in the habit of wasting energy on fear that doesn't tell me anything useful. She looked at her mug. Being scared of what already happened isn't useful. Being smart about what comes next is. Elena looked at her for a moment. How do you do that? She said. How do you keep it that organized? I have a brother who needed me to not fall apart, Clara said simply. You learn to triage. She paused. You have the same thing, actually. You just haven't framed it that way. Elena tilted her head. You have your brother, Clara said, nodding toward Damien. And he has you. That's not weakness. That's the thing that makes you keep getting up in the morning. She looked at Elena directly. That's what I saw when everything happened. I didn't see the daughter of a powerful family. I saw a girl who was terrified of losing the person who was sitting across from her. Elena went very still. That's what I didn't want to happen, Clara said. The rest of it, whoever was behind it, whatever it meant, that wasn't what I was thinking about. I was thinking about you. The kitchen was quiet for a moment. Then Elena said quietly and completely, without her usual composure, Thank you. Don't thank me, Clara said. I know your standard answer. Elena almost managed a smile. But I mean it. Clara looked at her for a long moment. Something passed between them in that look, not the dramatic recognition of a movie moment, but something quieter and more durable. The particular understanding that forms between two people who have, for different reasons and from different directions, arrived at the same understanding of what matters. Damien watched it from across the kitchen and felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Not the strategic version of hope that lived inside planning and contingency. The actual thing. The thing that happened without permission. He didn't examine it closely. He had other things to examine closely today. At noon, he had his second call with Marco. Victor's getting restless, Marco said. He's called your assistant twice this morning asking about your schedule. He wants a meeting. When? He suggested tomorrow morning. He said it was urgent, operational matters. He wants to see how much I know, Damien said. He wants to read you. Yes. Damien thought for a moment. Tell him I'll meet him tomorrow. 2:00, my office. He paused. And Marco, I want the final documents ready by tonight. The chain of payments, the communication logs, the broker records. Everything organized and clean. It'll be ready. One more thing. Damien kept his voice even. Find out where Gerald Watts is. A brief silence. Currently or as of when? Currently. Understood? Marco paused. Are we moving on this tonight? Not tonight. I need tomorrow's conversation first. Damien looked at the wall. I need to hear what Victor thinks I know before I show him what I actually know. After the call, he stayed at his desk. He ran the conversation he would have with Victor the next day. He ran it forward and backward. He ran Victor's likely openings, his probable deflections, the points at which he would shift from shaping the narrative to reading Damien's responses. Victor was intelligent and experienced and careful, and had the advantage of believing he was ahead. That belief was both his greatest asset and the thing that would undo him. A man who believes he's ahead stops checking. Damien had learned that from Victor himself, in a different context, in a different decade, when Damien was still young enough to learn things. It landed with a particular weight now. He was still at his desk at 3 p.m. when Clara appeared in the doorway. She had the paperbacks with her, which he was beginning to understand was a kind of talisman. Something carried to maintain the sense of a life that continued normally alongside whatever was happening around her. She looked at him with the measured expression she wore when she'd decided to say something and was organizing how. Can I ask you something? She said. Yes. You're planning something for tomorrow. He looked at her. I've seen that face, she said. My brother makes it before he's decided to try something difficult. Complete stillness, very focused, already running through how it goes wrong. She tilted her head. What is it? A meeting? With. He said nothing. She read his silence with the accuracy of someone who had learned to read silences because the people around her often couldn't say the difficult things out loud. "The person who organized the attack," she said. "I'm going to let him think he still has the advantage." She looked at him for a moment. And then I show him he doesn't." She was quiet. "Victor," she said. The name came out of her slowly, the way you say a name when you've suspected it for a while but haven't allowed yourself to say it. Damien looked at her sharply. "The man at the dinner," she said. "The one who wasn't there. You mentioned him once on the phone in the hallway the night everything happened. I wasn't eavesdropping, I heard through the door." She met his eyes. "The way you said his name was the way you say a name when you're angry and trying not to be." He stared at her. "You notice too much," he said. "I work in a restaurant," she said. "You learn to read people fast, or you get written off fast." She paused. "Is Elena in danger while this meeting happens?" "She's being moved to a secure location tonight. Marco's arranging it." "Is she going to fight you on it?" "Probably." "Do you want help?" He almost said no. The automatic response, again the single-word wall that had served him across 20 years of being a man who handled things alone. "She'd take it better from you," he said instead. Clara nodded. That evening, Damien watched Clara sit down with Elena in the living room and talk to her for 40 minutes. He didn't hear most of it. He was on the other side of the house on calls. But he saw Elena's face when they came to find him afterward, not the tight, controlled expression of someone who had been managed, but the looser, more honest expression of someone who had been spoken to directly and found the directness bearable because it came with real care underneath it. "Fine," Elena said to him. "I'll go. But I'm taking my laptop because I have an application due Friday, and I'm not missing the deadline because of Victor Hale." "Fair," Damien said. Elena looked at Clara. "You'll still be here when I get back," she said. It was phrased as a statement, but functioned as a question. Clara looked at Damien briefly, then back at Elena. "I'll be here," she said. After Elena left with Marco's team at 9 that night, the house was very quiet. Damien sat in the study. Clara sat across from him. The fire was on. It had been on when he arrived that morning, and nobody had turned it off, which meant the house had that specific warmth of a place being lived in, rather than merely occupied. "Tell me about Noah," Damien said. Clara looked at him. "What about him?" "Whatever you want. You've told me the facts already. I have the facts. I mean, what's he like?" Something shifted in her face. Not the guarded shift of someone deciding how much to reveal. The unguarded shift of someone who has been asked the right question. "He's obsessed with deep-sea creatures," she said. Damien blinked. "Deep-sea creatures. Specifically bioluminescent ones. He has 3 library books on them checked out at any given time, and he talks about them like other kids talk about superheroes." She almost smiled. "He told me last week that the anglerfish is the most underappreciated fish in the ocean because everyone focuses on the teeth, but the light is the actual remarkable thing." "He's 8. He's been sick since he was 4, she said. "Sick kids read more than healthy ones. They have more time." She paused. "He wants to be a marine biologist. Does he know how expensive that is?" "He knows I'll figure it out." She looked at her hands. "I told him once not to limit his dreams based on what the money situation looks like right now, because the money situation is always going to look like something different later. He took me at my word." A pause. "Sometimes that's a lot of pressure." "But you'd rather have that pressure than the alternative." She looked up. "Yes, I'd rather be the person he believes can figure it out than the person who told him to dream smaller." Damien looked at her. "He's lucky," he said. "I'm the lucky one," she said simply. "He's the reason I didn't let the last 2 years break me." She said it without self-pity or performance. Just fact. The particular steadiness of someone who has located precisely what they are living for. The fire made a sound. The city outside made its sounds. And Damien sat in the quiet of his own house and thought about what it meant to know with that kind of certainty what you were living for. He had built an empire. He had inherited power and grown it and defended it and lost things defending it. He had made decisions that cost people and justified those decisions with strategy and necessity and the language of systems and structures that required certain kinds of maintenance. He hadn't thought about what it was for, not in a long time, not in the way Clara thought about Noah, not in the immediate, unconditional, unambiguous way of someone who could point at a person and say that. That is what it is for. He had Elena. He had always had Elena. But somewhere in the accumulation of protecting her, the guards, the systems, the operational architecture of keeping her safe, he had made the protection the point instead of her. He had started building walls and stopped thinking about who was inside them and why they mattered. Victor had known that. Victor had seen the architecture and found the crack in it. And the crack was not Elena. The crack was that Damien had slowly stopped being able to feel the reason for the protection without the protection itself becoming the reason. He sat very still with that understanding. It was not a comfortable thing to understand. "You're doing it again," Clara said. He looked up. "The stillness," she said. "The whole face thing. I was thinking. About tomorrow. About everything," he said. She looked at him for a long moment, not pushing, not asking, just present in the specific way that was becoming, without either of them deciding it, one of the most valuable things she offered. "Try to sleep tonight," she said. "I will." "You said that yesterday." "I got more sleep than you did." "That's a very low bar," she said. He almost smiled. She stood up carefully, mindful of the shoulder. She picked up the paperback. She walked to the door. "Clara," he said. She turned. "Whatever happens tomorrow, whatever comes after it, I want you to know that you being here has made this clearer than it would have been." He paused. "Not just the investigation, everything." She looked at him for a moment. "Get some sleep, Damien," she said. She left. He sat with the fire. He sat with the name she had just used, not Mr. Moretti, not the professional distance she had maintained since the first morning, and the particular weight of it. The specific weight of a first name, said by someone who says it because the distance has simply become inaccurate, not because they've decided to close it. The name landed the way things land when they're true. At midnight, his phone buzzed. Marco. He picked up. "Watts moved," Marco said. "He left his apartment 40 minutes ago with a bag. One bag. Moving fast." Damien was on his feet before the sentence finished. "Track him," he said. "Don't lose him." "Already on it." "But Damien," Marco paused, and the pause had weight. "He went north. Not to an airport. North on 90. North on 90. Damien's mind ran the geography in half a second. "The warehouse," he said. "That's what I think too." The Moretti organization had 3 properties in the industrial corridor north of the city. One of them, a warehouse that had been operational 6 years ago and sat dormant since, had appeared twice in Victor's communication logs in ways that had seemed incidental at first reading. They didn't seem incidental now. "Send me the address," Damien said. He was already moving. "And call?" "Already called him," Marco said. "He's meeting you there." "How many?" 6. Plus me. Keep it quiet. No movement that Victor would see." "Understood." A pause. "Damien, be careful." He didn't answer that. He was already out the door. On the stairs he paused. He looked back toward the guest room on the 3rd floor. The light was on under the door. He almost went back. Then he kept moving. Because whatever Clara Bennett made him feel, and he was beginning to be honest with himself about the fact that she made him feel something he hadn't felt in years, it would still be there when he got back. If what he found at that warehouse was what he thought he was going to find, tomorrow's meeting with Victor was no longer the plan. Tonight was. The warehouse was exactly what Damien expected, and nothing he was prepared for. Not physically. Physically, it was what it had always been, a dormant property, vacant for 6 years, sitting in the industrial corridor north of the city. the way dozens of similar buildings sat unremarkable from the outside. The kind of structure that registered in the peripheral vision and was immediately forgotten. Damien had been inside it twice. Once when they acquired it 2 years later for a meeting that had since become irrelevant. He knew the layout. The way he knew the layouts of all his properties, not in detail, but in structure, the broad geography of it, stored in the part of his memory reserved for operational knowledge. What he wasn't prepared for was what Marco's man found inside it. They went in quiet. 6 men, plus Marco Damien, at the center of the formation, the way he always positioned himself, not at the back, not pushed into protection, which his people had long since given up arguing with him about. If something was happening in his name on his property, he was going to see it firsthand. Gerald Watts was there. He was not alone. There were 2 other men Damien didn't recognize. Phones, laptops, a folding table with documents spread across it. The particular setup of people in the middle of something operational, not waiting for something to happen, but actively managing something already in motion. When Damien's team came through, Watts stood up so fast he knocked the folding chair behind him. "Mr. Moretti?" he started. "Sit down," Marco said. Watts sat down. Damien walked to the table. He looked at what was on it. Not quickly. Slowly. With the systematic attention of someone who had trained himself over 2 decades to read a situation completely before responding to any part of it. What he saw on that table changed the shape of everything he had understood since 6 o'clock that morning. The documents weren't about territory. They weren't about the organizational handover he'd assumed Victor was positioning for. They were about Elena, specifically, and this was the part that hit him somewhere below his sternum, with a force that had nothing to do with strategy. They were about Elena's schedule, her apartment address, her class times, the coffee shop she went to on Tuesday and Thursday mornings, the route she walked when the weather was good. The kind of documentation that wasn't built for a single night at a restaurant. The kind of documentation that was built for sustained access, for knowing where someone was consistently over time. Victor hadn't been planning one event. He'd been building a capability. The attack at Alara wasn't the plan. It was the test run. A proof of concept designed to demonstrate to someone, a buyer, a partner, an entity that wasn't Victor himself, that access to Elena Moretti was real, reliable, and operational. Damien's hand was flat on the table. He was aware of his own breathing in the specific way that happened when his mind had just reorganized around a new and worse version of the truth. "Who is he selling to?" Damien said. Watts opened his mouth. "Don't decide whether to answer," Damien said. "There isn't a version of tonight where you leave here without telling me. The only variable is how long it takes." Watts looked at Marco. Marco looked back at him with the expression of a man who had made this exact point to other people in other rooms and been accurate every time. Watts talked. The name he gave was not a name from Damien's world. It was a name from a different world entirely. A man named Preston Calder. 54 years old, Chicago-born, Boston-educated, currently running a private equity operation out of a 42nd floor office downtown that was on its surface entirely legitimate. Real estate, infrastructure, portfolio companies in logistics and supply chain. The kind of clean documented wealth that moved through the city in a completely different layer than Damien's, and occasionally at certain altitude, overlapped with it in the way that 2 different weather systems sometimes occupied the same sky. Calder had made 3 attempts over the past 8 years to acquire properties in territories that the Moretti organization either controlled directly or had operational relationships with. All 3 attempts had been blocked. Not by force. Calder wasn't a man who used force. By access. By the specific leverage that the Moretti organization's presence in those corridors gave them over the regulatory and permitting processes that someone like Calder needed to move large capital through certain kinds of real estate. Calder couldn't move Damien, so he had found someone who could get close enough to try something else. Elena wasn't a target for violence. She never had been. She was a hostage in waiting. A pressure point to be activated when the direct path was unavailable. a mechanism for getting Damien to a negotiating table where the terms were not his own, and the exit was not on his own timetable. Victor had been selling that access. 14 months of building documentation, establishing patterns, verifying logistics. And Alara had been the demonstration proof to Calder that when the moment came, Victor could deliver. Damien stood very still for a long time. Then he said, "Where is Calder right now?" "I don't know his location," Watts said. "I only deal with Victor." "When is your next contact with Victor?" "Tomorrow morning, 9 o'clock. Damien looked at Marco. Marco looked back at him with the expression that meant, "I know what you're thinking." And yes, it changes the plan. It changed everything. The meeting he had scheduled with Victor for 2 o'clock the next afternoon was no longer a read operation. It was no longer about seeing how much Victor thought he knew before showing him what he actually knew. Because what Victor thought he knew, and what Damien actually knew, were now separated by a distance that Damien could use. Victor thought the warehouse was clean. Victor thought Watts was contained. Victor had no idea that Damien was standing inside his operation at midnight, looking at documents that mapped the full architecture of a scheme that had been running quietly under Damien's own roof for over a year. The advantage had shifted. Completely. "Lock this down," Damien said to Marco. "Everything stays exactly as it is. I want the documents photographed and the originals preserved. The laptops go with us." He looked at Watts. "You have a choice to make. You can be useful or you can be a liability. Those are the only two options available to you. Think carefully about which one you'd like to be." Watts looked at him. "Useful," he said. "Smart," Marco said. In the car going back, Damien was quiet in the way that was different from his usual quiet. Usually his silence was operational processing, calculating, running contingencies. This one had a different texture. Heavier, more personal. The kind of quiet that accumulated around something you were going to have to carry for a long time. He had trusted Victor for 15 years. He had not just trusted him professionally. He had trusted him in the way you trust a person, when you've been through enough difficult things together that the trust stops being a choice and becomes structural, built into the load-bearing parts of how you move through the world. The kind of trust that when it turns out to be misplaced doesn't just feel like loss. It feels like discovering that one of the walls you've been leaning against was never actually there. He got back to the house at 2:30 in the morning. He came through the front door and stopped. Clara was in the front hallway. She was in the borrowed shirt and jeans she'd worn that evening, and she had her phone in her hand, and she was looking at him with an expression that told him she had been awake the entire time he was gone and had known something was happening from the moment she heard the front door close hours earlier. "You went to the warehouse," she said. He looked at her. "How?" "You were wearing your jacket when you left, and your keys were gone, and you'd just gotten off the phone with someone who made you move fast." She tilted her head. "Also, you didn't say goodbye." He stood in the hallway. "I found something," he said. "Worse than this morning." "Yes." She looked at him for a long moment. She read his face the way she always read his face, completely, and without hesitation, with the accuracy of someone who had stopped relying on what people said and learned to read what their bodies were carrying instead. "Come sit down," she said. He followed her into the kitchen. She put water on without asking him if he wanted anything, which was the right call, because he would have said no out of reflex. She moved carefully because of the shoulder. She set 2 mugs on the counter and leaned against it and looked at him across the kitchen and waited. He told her. Not everything. The operational specifics he left in the abstracted form they needed to stay in, but the shape of it, the full shape. The 14 months, the documentation. The fact that Elena wasn't a target for a single event, but for something sustained. The name, Preston Calder. The thing Victor had been building in the space of Damien's trust. He told her the shape of it and watched her face absorb it. She was quiet for a moment after he finished. "Elena doesn't know the full version," she said. "No." "You're going to have to tell her." "I know." "Not tomorrow. Tonight was enough." She paused. But soon. Yes. She poured the water. She handed him the mug. She looked at him over the rim of hers. What are you going to do about Calder? She said. One thing at a time. Victor first. Victor tomorrow at 2. Yes, but it's different now. He doesn't know what I found tonight. He thinks he's still managing what I see. He set the mug down. Tomorrow I let him talk. I let him give me the version of the story where he's still in control of the information. And then I show him the warehouse. Clara was quiet. You're not going to give him a way out, she said, not a judgment, a reading. No. She nodded slowly. And after Victor, she said. Calder. She looked at him. How? Differently than Victor. He picked up the mug again. Calder operates in a world where everything is documented and regulated and subject to consequence. He's not built for what Victor is built for. He made a miscalculation. What miscalculation? He thought the only version of Damien Moretti was the one that responded to leverage with force. He looked at her steadily. He doesn't know there are other options. Something shifted in her face. A small thing. But he caught it. You're thinking about changing something, she said. He said nothing. Not just how you handle Calder, she said. Something bigger. The kitchen was quiet. I've been thinking about it since you told me about Noah, he said finally. About the way you described what you were working toward, the clarity of it. He set the mug down. I have power, significant power, and I've been using most of it to maintain itself. Clara looked at him. That's not enough anymore, he said. She was very still. What would be enough? She said quietly. He didn't answer immediately, because the answer was something he was still building, still finding the shape of, still learning the language for. But underneath the incompleteness of it was something solid, something that had been solidifying since a woman in worn-out shoes had thrown herself across a marble floor for no reason except the right one. Something that Noah would call worth doing, he said. Clara's face did something he hadn't seen it do before. She didn't smile. It wasn't a smile. It was quieter than that. It was the expression of someone who has been carrying something heavy for a very long time and has just unexpectedly found someone standing close enough to feel the weight of it without being asked to carry it themselves. She looked away. Get some sleep, she said. You have a long day tomorrow. He went upstairs. He slept. For the first time in 3 days, he actually slept. He was up at 6. He had coffee made and 3 pages of notes on his desk by 7. Marco arrived at 8 with the documented record from the warehouse organized and indexed and ready. At 8:45, Damien called his attorney, not the organization's attorney, his personal attorney, a woman named Judith Crane, who had represented him privately for 11 years, and who he trusted with a specific category of thing that never overlapped with anything operational. I need to talk to you about a restructure, he said. Not today, but soon. I want to understand what it would take. Judith was quiet for a moment. How significant a restructure? Significant. Another pause. He could hear her processing. All right, she said. Call me Friday. Thursday, he said. Thursday. She agreed. At 9, precisely on schedule, Gerald Watts made his scheduled contact with Victor. Damien was listening. The call was exactly what he expected, a brief operational check-in. Nothing that would flag as unusual. Watts confirming that the documentation was in order, and that the next phase of verification for Calder's review could proceed as scheduled. Victor's voice on the recording was steady and professional, and completely normal, which told Damien everything he needed to know about how certain Victor was of his position. He was certain. He was entirely, completely certain that he was ahead. At 1:45, 15 minutes before Victor was due to arrive, Clara appeared in the doorway of Damien's office. She was moving better today. The shoulder still clearly limited her, but she'd found a way of holding herself that worked around it. She looked at him with the steady reading expression. You're ready, she said. Yes. How do you feel? Clear, he said. She looked at him for a moment. Don't let him take you somewhere emotional, she said. He's going to try. He's known you long enough to know where to push. She held his eyes. Stay ahead of it. I will. And Damien, she paused. Whatever he says about the past, the 15 years your father, everything he did that was real, that wasn't fake just because this was happening alongside it. People are complicated. The betrayal doesn't erase the history. She looked at him steadily. Let yourself be clear-eyed about both. He looked at her for a long moment. Where did you learn to think like this? He said. Hospital waiting rooms, she said simply. You have a lot of time to think in hospital waiting rooms. Victor arrived at 2 o'clock. He came through the front of the house the way he always had, familiar with the space, comfortable in it, moving through it, with the ease of someone who had been here hundreds of times and expected to be here hundreds more. He was dressed well. He looked rested. He looked, Damien thought, as he watched him cross the room like a man who had woken up this morning feeling good about where things stood. Damien? Victor sat down across from him. You look like you slept. I did, Damien said. Good. Victor set his phone face down on the desk, a habit, something he'd always done in meetings. He wanted to feel focused. I wanted to update you in person, the investigation into Tuesday night. Go ahead. Victor laid it out with the precision and confidence of someone who had prepared thoroughly. The false trail he'd constructed was elegant, genuinely elegant, the kind of misdirection that would have worked on almost anyone without Marco's independent track. He named a low-level logistics manager as the probable leak, provided documentation that circumstantially supported it, walked Damien through a recommended response that would have eliminated an innocent man and left the actual architecture completely intact. Damien listened to all of it. He didn't interrupt. He didn't show anything. When Victor finished, there was a brief silence. That's thorough, Damien said. I want this resolved quickly, Victor said. For Elena's sake. He paused. How is she? She's well. Damien looked at him. She wanted me to say hello. Something moved through Victor's eyes, barely, a flicker. Tell her I'm glad she's all right, he said. She's always been... He stopped. She matters. Damien let the silence sit for exactly the right amount of time. Then he said, I went to the warehouse last night. Victor's face didn't break. That was the thing about Victor. His face almost never broke in the first moment. He was too disciplined for that. What happened instead was a millisecond recalibration, a reorientation so fast it was almost imperceptible, the specific adjustment of a man who had just received information that required him to rethink his current position without showing that he was rethinking it. Almost imperceptible. Not quite. The one on 90, Victor said. His voice was exactly right. Mild curiosity. That's been sitting empty for years. It had company last night, Damien said. Oh, Watts was there. Damien kept his voice level. With 2 associates and a folding table and documentation that I found very interesting. Victor was quiet for a moment. I don't know anyone named Watts, he said. I know you don't, Damien said. You know him through 2 layers. Gerald Watts, through a broker named Carlyle, through your private account at a bank in Zurich that you opened 16 months ago. He reached into the folder on his desk and set the first page face up between them. I have the full record. Victor looked at the page. His face still didn't break, but something changed in his posture. The quality of stillness became different. No longer the stillness of a man who was in control of the room. The stillness of a man who had just understood that the map he'd been navigating by was wrong. Damien, he said. Don't. Damien's voice was quiet. Don't use my name like that. Don't make it personal right now. It is personal. I know it is. Damien set another page on the desk. That's why I'd like you to explain it to me. Not the logistics, I have the logistics. The reason. He met Victor's eyes directly. 15 years. I want to understand why. Victor looked at him for a long time, and then he said something Damien hadn't expected. He told the truth. Not all of it. Not cleanly. But enough of it that Damien could recognize it by its texture, the particular grain of something a person says when they've stopped calculating and started talking. "Your father built something with me," Victor said. "I was there from the beginning. I know what it cost. I know what we did to build it and what we lost building it, and I was there for every piece of it." He paused. "When he died and you took over, I told myself I was loyal to the organization, to what he built." A pause. "But what I was actually loyal to was the version of this where my contribution was visible, where what I built mattered in proportion to what it cost me." Damien said nothing. "You're good at this," Victor said. "Better than I wanted you to be when you started. You outgrew what I taught you faster than I expected, and then you kept going." He looked at the pages on the desk. "There's no version of this organization where I'm not the man who trained you, who made you possible, and you were going to keep growing until that was the smallest fact in the room. So you decided to take something. I decided to be paid for what I'd actually given." Victor's voice didn't waver. "Calder was willing to pay for access. Not violence, I want you to understand that. What happened at Alara was meant to be clean. A demonstration. Nothing that would actually—" "She was 20 years old," Damien said. The temperature in the room dropped several degrees. "She was 20 years old in a restaurant that you told someone how to access," Damien said, and his voice stayed very quiet, which was how his voice got when the thing underneath it was the largest. "A woman I don't know put her body between my sister and the consequence of your decision. A woman who works 2 jobs and carries her brother's medical bills $30 at a time. That woman is in my guest room right now with stitches in her shoulder. Because of what you built." Victor was very still. "That was not the intention," he said. "I know what the intention was," Damien said. "I know the full architecture. I know about Calder. I know the timeline. I know what last Tuesday was supposed to demonstrate and to whom." He set the last page on the desk. "What I want you to understand is that there is nothing about your intention that changes what it produced." Victor looked at the pages. He looked at Damien. For the first time in 15 years, Damien watched Victor Hale not know what to do. The moment lasted. And in that moment, Damien thought about what Clara had said in the kitchen at 3 in the morning. That the betrayal didn't erase the history. That people were complicated. That real things had existed alongside the thing that had undone them. He let himself acknowledge that. He also let himself acknowledge that acknowledging it changed nothing about what came next. "I'm not going to do what you expected me to do," Damien said. Victor looked up. "You expected me to respond the way I've always responded," Damien said. "Fast, final, the way my father would have responded." He looked at him. "I'm not going to do that." Victor waited. "I'm going to give this to Judith," Damien said. "Every document, every communication log, every wire transfer, the warehouse, the broker, the Calder connection." He paused. "Not to my people. To people who deal in consequence that I don't control." Victor's expression shifted, because he understood immediately what that meant. Not internal resolution. Not the kind of ending that stayed inside the organization and shaped it from inside. The kind of ending that moved through systems that Victor had spent 15 years believing he was adjacent to and therefore somewhat protected from. "Damien, I'm also going to call Preston Calder," Damien said, "directly, today." He met Victor's eyes. "I'm going to tell him that his plan has changed, that the access he paid for isn't operational, that what he built with you is now documented in the hands of people who will find it professionally interesting." He paused. "And I'm going to offer him something instead." Victor stared at him. "What could you possibly offer Calder?" "A conversation," Damien said, "about what he actually wants, which is the properties, not Elena, not leverage, not the theater of getting someone to a table where they're afraid." He looked at him steadily. "He wants the properties. There's a version of this where that conversation happens without any of the rest of it. I'm going to offer him that version." Victor was quiet for a long moment. "That's not how you operate," he said. "I know," Damien said. It's how I'm going to operate." Something shifted in Victor's face. And the thing that shifted wasn't what Damien expected. It wasn't anger. It wasn't calculation. It looked very briefly, and then not at all like regret. "You would have given me what I needed," Victor said quietly, "if I had asked." "Maybe," Damien said. "We'll never know." He stood. "I want you out of the house in the next 10 minutes. Marco is outside. He'll be with you until Judith's team makes contact." Victor stood. He was 61 years old, and he had built significant things, and he was looking at the last room he would ever stand in as a trusted man, and he knew it. He looked at Damien. He didn't say anything else. He left. Damien stood at the desk for a minute after the door closed. He stood very still. He let himself feel the full weight of 15 years and what they had just become. He didn't rush past it. He didn't convert it into something more operational. He just stood there and felt it. Then he picked up his phone and called Judith Crane. "Today," he said. "Can we do today?" A pause. "Yes," she said. "I'll be there in 2 hours." "Thank you." He paused. "I also need you to start thinking about the restructure conversation. I wasn't planning on having it this week, but I think the timeline has moved." "How moved?" "Significantly." He paused. "I'll explain when you get here." He hung up. He sat down. He stared at the wall for 30 seconds. Then he got up and walked out of the office and through the house and into the kitchen, because there was only one person in the building he needed to talk to right now. And she was probably in there with the paperback and the coffee she'd been nursing for the past 2 hours while he was in that room. She was. She looked up when he came in. She read his face. "It's done," she said. "The first part," he said. "And he—" She stopped. "He told you why?" "Yes." "Was it what you expected?" "No," he said. "It was honest. It was still wrong, but it was honest." She nodded. "You chose differently," she said, "than what he expected." "I'm trying to." He sat down across from her. "I called Judith. She's coming today." He looked at her. "I also told her I want to start the restructure conversation." Clara looked at him. "The organization. Parts of it. The parts that can be different without—" He stopped. Started again. "There's a lot of money that currently maintains power for its own sake. That's been true for a long time, and I've known it was true, and I've been making peace with it, because the alternative required a different version of me than the one I was building." He met her eyes. "I'm building a different version." Clara was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "What does that look like?" "I don't know all of it yet," he said. "But I know some of it." He looked at her steadily. "I know there's a foundation that should exist. For kids like Noah. For medical situations that shouldn't bankrupt a family. For the kind of thing that falls through every available crack because the people it's happening to don't have access to anything that catches them." He paused. "I know that I have resources that could be that catch." Clara's hands were around her mug, and she was looking at him with an expression he couldn't fully read. "That's a big thing to build," she said. "I know." "You'd need someone who understood it from the inside," she said. "From the ground level. Who knew what it actually looked like to be the person falling through." He looked at her. She looked back at him. "I'm not looking for charity," she said quietly. "I want you to understand that. I know you're not, and I'm not going to pretend I don't need help. Noah needs help. The bills are real, and the next surgery—" She stopped. "The next surgery is in 4 months, and I have 11,000 of the 30 I need." He said nothing. He let her finish. "But if this is going to be something real," she said, "and not just—" She paused. "Not just a way of making an equation balance because you feel like you owe me something, then I need to know it's real." "It's real," he said. She looked at him for a long time. "Okay," she said. One word. Small. But the way she said it had a different weight than any previous version of "okay" he'd heard from her. Not agreement. Not acceptance. Something with more structure to it. The okay of someone who has decided to trust a thing, knowing what trust costs, and deciding the cost is worth it. He exhaled. Outside, the city was doing what it always did, moving constant indifferent to the specific human reckonings happening inside any given building at any given moment. Chicago didn't pause for revelations. It didn't make space for the particular kind of shift that happened when a person decided to become a different version of themselves. It just kept going, traffic and wind, and the low hum of a million parallel lives. But inside that kitchen, something had settled. Something that had been moving fast and uncertain since Tuesday night had found a temporary resting point, the way water finds its level, not permanent, not finished, but honest about where things stood. Judith arrived at 4. She was 60 years old, small and relentlessly precise. The kind of attorney who made the other attorneys in the room feel like they needed to take better notes. She shook Damien's hand and was introduced briefly to Clara and assessed her in approximately 4 seconds with the accuracy of someone who had spent decades reading situations at speed. "She's not an employee," Judith said to Damien when Clara had stepped out of the room. "No," he said. "What is she?" He thought about it for a moment. "She's the reason I called you Thursday instead of next week," he said. Judith looked at him. "All right," she said, and opened her briefcase. They went through the Victor documentation first. 2 hours. Judith was thorough in a way that left no ambiguity about what was coming for Victor Hale, and through him, what was coming for Preston Calder. She built the sequence of it with the same care she built everything precedent-aware, consequence-mapped, airtight, in the way that mattered when the people on the other side had resources to fight back with. Then Damien brought up the restructure. He laid out what he was thinking. Not all of it. Some of it was still forming, but enough to give Judith the architecture and let her start identifying what was possible, what was complicated, and what was going to require a longer conversation. She listened. She made notes. When he finished, she sat back and looked at him with the expression of someone recalibrating something. "This is a significant departure," she said. "Yes. It'll draw attention, the kind of attention that asks questions about where the money came from." "I know. Some of those questions are going to be uncomfortable." "I know that too." He met her eyes. "I'd rather answer uncomfortable questions about a foundation that helps people than comfortable questions about an organization that doesn't." He paused. "I'm aware that's easier to say than to build." Judith looked at him for a moment. "Your father would have thought you'd lost your mind," she said. "Probably." "I think he'd have come around," she said. She picked up her pen. "Let's talk about structure." They were still talking at 7 when Clara knocked on the office door and said that she'd made something which turned out to be pasta because she'd found ingredients in his kitchen and she needed to do something practical with her hands, and cooking was something she could do one-armed without embarrassing herself. Judith accepted a plate with the air of someone who had long since stopped being surprised by anything a client did. They ate in the office. At 8, Judith left with the documents and a timeline, and 3 action items with deadlines, which was how she operated and always had. After she left, Damien found Clara washing the dishes carefully with her good arm, the other held close to her side, and he came up beside her and took the pan she was struggling with and washed it without comment. They stood side by side at the sink. "Judith is good," Clara said. "The best." "She likes you." "She doesn't like anyone," he said. "She respects competence occasionally." "She looked at you differently after the restructure conversation." Clara handed him a pot. That was respect. He didn't argue with her read. They finished the dishes. The house was quiet again. Outside, the night had settled into the particular stillness that came late in Chicago when the traffic had thinned, but the city hadn't gone to sleep, a middle register of sound that was familiar and constant. "Elena calls tomorrow morning," Clara said. 10 o'clock. Are you going to tell her the full version? Yes, he said. She was right. She can handle it. She should know. Clara nodded. Then she said, I called Noah today, while you were meeting with Victor. He looked at her. Is he? He's good. He's with Mrs. Okafor next door. She watches him when I'm away. She looked at her hands. I told him I'd been in a small accident and was resting for a few days. I didn't. She stopped. I didn't tell him the rest. Does he know something's different? He knows everything's different, she said. He's 8, and he's been sick most of his life. He reads rooms better than most adults I know. She paused. He asked me if I was safe. Damien was quiet. What did you tell him? I told him yes. She met his eyes. Which was true? He looked at her, and something that had been growing in the back of his awareness since a marble floor and a woman who ran when everyone else stopped. Something he had been carefully not naming, carefully not examining too closely, not because he was afraid of what it was, but because the moment for it hadn't been right, and there had been too many other things demanding clarity first, that something arrived at the front of his awareness and stood there and looked at him and waited to be acknowledged. He was not ready to name it in front of her. Not tonight. Tonight, there was still too much in motion. Victor's consequences were in process. Calder was a conversation that hadn't happened yet. The restructure was an architecture that was just beginning to be drawn. Elena was in a secure location, processing a version of the truth that was about to get fuller. And Clara was standing in his kitchen with stitches in her shoulder, and a brother she needed to get back to, and $30 at a time standing between her and her next surgery bill. There was too much that needed to be different before anything personal could be honest. But the thing was there, and he thought, looking at her face, that she knew it was there. And he thought that she had decided with the same practical clarity she applied to everything that tonight was not the night either. Get some sleep, he said. She almost smiled. You always say that. You almost never do it. Tonight I might, she said. She went upstairs. He stood in the kitchen for a moment. He thought about what came next. Not the details were handled in process moving. He thought about the shape of it, the longer arc. Something was ending, and something was beginning. And for the first time in a very long time, the beginning felt like the more important thing. His phone buzzed on the counter. Marco. He picked up. Calder's office called, Marco said. Someone on his team. Apparently he'd like a meeting. Damien paused. He reached out to us. His assistant, 40 minutes ago, says Mr. Calder has a proposal he'd like to discuss directly. Damien thought about that. Victor's arrest, when it became real to the people around him, had moved faster than expected. Tell them I'm available Thursday, he said. Thursday. A pause. That's fast. I want momentum, Damien said. Tell them Thursday at noon. My choice of location. He hung up. He looked at the ceiling. Then he went upstairs. He stopped outside the guest room. The light was off. She was actually sleeping. He stood there for a moment. Then he went to his own room. And this time when sleep came, it came with the particular quality of something that had been earned, not easy, not without cost, but real in the way that things are real when they've come through enough to prove themselves. Elena's call came at 10 o'clock exactly. She was already talking before the phone finished its first ring, which was how Elena operated when she'd been thinking about something all night and had run out of patience for the formality of a greeting. I want to come back today, she said. Good morning, Damien said. Good morning, I want to come back today. I know. Then say yes. I need to tell you something first. He paused. Sit down. A brief silence. The sound of her moving. Then, I'm sitting. Tell me. He told her the full version. He had promised himself he would, and he kept the promise, which meant he told her about Victor, not in the edited form he might have used a week ago, but in the complete form, the 14 months, the documentation, the warehouse Calder, the thing Elena had been in the architecture of without knowing it. He told her about the meeting yesterday. about what Victor had said and what Damien had decided to do with it. He told her about Judith and the documents and what was now in motion. He told her all of it. Elena was quiet for a long time after he finished. Not the silence of shock. The silence of someone absorbing something they had been partly prepared for and are now receiving in its full weight. "He came to dinner in January," she said finally. "I know. He sat with me for 3 hours. We talked about Dad." Her voice was completely steady. "He asked me if I felt safe." Damien said nothing. "I said yes," she said. "I told him that as long as you were running things, I felt safe." She paused. He nodded and said that was good. The particular silence that followed, that had its own texture. "Elena, I'm not going to fall apart about it," she said. "I'm angry. I'm very angry, but I'm not going to fall apart." Another pause. "Can I come home now?" "Yes," he said. "Marco will have you back by noon." "Good." A beat. "Is Clara still there?" "Yes." "Good," she said again, and something in the second good was different from the first, softer, more personal, carrying the specific weight of a young woman who had recently learned what it felt like to be in a room full of people who didn't move, and one person who did. She arrived at 11:40. She came through the front door with her bag and her laptop, and the particular forward momentum of someone who had decided that being stationary was finished and being back in her own version of normal was the immediate priority. She dropped the bag by the stairs and hugged Damien in the way she hugged him when something real had happened, and the hug was the only language accurate enough. Tight. Brief her face against his shoulder for exactly 3 seconds before she pulled back and looked at him with clear eyes. "You look better than you did Tuesday," she said. "That's a low bar," Clara said from the kitchen doorway. Elena turned and looked at her. Then she crossed the room and hugged her too. Clara was clearly startled. Her good arm came up after a half-second delay and held on, and she looked briefly over Elena's shoulder at Damien with an expression that was somewhere between moved and uncertain, like someone receiving a gift they didn't know they'd asked for. "Thank you," Elena said into her shoulder, "for saying, 'Don't be afraid.' I know I said it before, but I need to say it again." "You're going to make me feel like I did something remarkable," Clara said. "And I really didn't." "You did," Elena said. She pulled back and looked at her directly. "Don't argue with me about this. I have a lot of practice arguing." "She does," Damien confirmed. Clara looked between them. "You're both impossible," she said. But something in her face had loosened the specific loosening of someone who has been held at careful distance from warmth for practical reasons, and has just been without warning walked directly into it. They had lunch together, the three of them, in the kitchen, that was becoming something of a command center for the human parts of everything that was happening. Not the operational parts, not the legal and strategic parts that lived in Damien's office, but the parts that required people to sit across from each other and eat actual food and speak in actual sentences about things that mattered. Elena wanted to know everything, not the edited version. The full version, including the parts that Clara was in. She asked questions the way Elena had always asked questions directly without apology, with the precision of someone who understood that incomplete information was not actually a kindness. Clara answered her questions the same way. They talked for 2 hours. By the time the plates were cleared, Elena knew about Noah, about the bills, about the 2 jobs and the worn shoes and the surgery in 4 months that Clara had been trying not to think about, because thinking about it made the anxiety of not knowing where the money was coming from lodge itself in the center of her chest and stay there. Elena listened to all of it. Then she said, "I want to meet him." Clara blinked. "Noah, yes." Elena said it simply as if the request required no justification. "You saved my life. I'd like to meet your brother. Those things are connected." Clara looked at her for a moment. "He's going to think you're incredible," she said. "He thinks everyone is incredible who isn't sick because being sick is the primary reference point." "I might actually be incredible," Elena said. "I haven't ruled it out." Clara laughed. It was the first time Damien had heard her laugh, not a smile, not the quiet, near smile she deployed frequently, and which he had catalogued without meaning to, but an actual laugh. Brief and unguarded, the kind that happened when something caught a person before they could decide whether to let it. Elena looked pleased with herself. Damien made coffee. At 2 o'clock, his phone buzzed. He excused himself and took the call in the office. It was Judith. "Preston Calder's attorney called me an hour ago," she said. Her voice had a specific quality. He recognized the crisp, slightly accelerated delivery of someone who has information that changes the shape of something. "He's not fighting the documentation." Damien sat down. "Explain." His attorney indicated that Mr. Calder is aware of the records now in our possession and is prepared to acknowledge that his relationship with Victor Hale has created exposure that he'd prefer to address proactively rather than defensively. A pause. Which is lawyer language for he's scared and he wants a deal. He should be scared. He is. Judith paused again. His attorney also indicated something else. Calder is specifically requesting that the Thursday meeting include the waitress. Damien went very still. "Repeat that," he said. "Preston Calder is requesting the presence of Clara Bennett at Thursday's meeting." Judith's voice was measured. His attorney used the phrase directly relevant party. He said Mr. Calder has something to say that is specifically relevant to her. Damien stared at the desk. "That's not a condition I agree to without understanding why," he said. "I communicated that." His attorney said Mr. Calder will explain the relevance at the meeting. He was not prepared to disclose it in advance. She paused. "My read is that it's genuine, not tactical." There was something in how the attorney said it that suggested even he wasn't fully briefed on the reason. After he hung up, Damien sat with the information for a full minute. Calder wanted Clara in the room. He could think of 100 reasons that might be manipulative, and 2 reasons it might be genuine. The problem was that the 2 genuine reasons were the kind that mattered. He went back to the kitchen. Clara and Elena were doing the thing they had apparently decided to do together, which was reorganize the pantry because Elena claimed it was philosophically chaotic, and Clara, who organized things when she needed her hands to do something, had agreed. They were deep in a conversation about whether alphabetical or categorical organization was superior when Damien came in. They both looked at him. He looked at Clara. "Can I talk to you for a minute?" Elena looked between them and said with enormous dignity, "I'll finish the spices." In the hallway, Damien told Clara what Judith had said. Her face went through several things in quick succession. Surprise was the first one. Then something more careful and considered. Then a stillness that he recognized as her processing mode, the quieting that happened when she was taking something in completely before responding to any part of it. "He wants me there," she said. "He says there's something relevant specifically to you." "I've never met the man." "I know." "Has he—" She stopped. "Do you think he knows about Noah? About the bills?" Damien looked at her. "It's possible. If Victor had access to general records, it's possible Calder has access to the same." Her jaw tightened, slightly. The specific tightening of someone who has just learned that their most private difficulty may have been visible to people they never consented to. "That's a violation," she said quietly. "Yes," he said. "It is. And you want to know if I'll go?" "I want to know what you want," he said. "This is your decision. You're not obligated to be in any room with any part of this." She was quiet for a moment. "If he has something to say that's relevant to me," she said, "I'd rather hear it to my face than wonder what it was." She met his eyes. "I'll go." He nodded. "I'll be there," he said. "I know you will," she said, and then quietly, almost to herself, "That helps." Thursday arrived the way important days arrived, without ceremony, with the same gray Chicago morning light as any other day, the city making its ordinary sounds outside, while inside the house, people prepared for things that were not ordinary at all. Judith had selected the location. A private conference room at a firm downtown that was neutral ground in the specific way that meant both parties had stood on it in different contexts, and neither one owned the advantage of it. 12 floors up. A long table. Water and coffee already set out when they arrived. Damien came in first with Marco and Judith. Clara came in beside him, not behind him, not positioned as someone secondary, but alongside, which was the only positioning that made sense, and which he had not needed to think about. Calder was already there. He was 54, exactly as described, with the particular presentation of a man who had spent 30 years being the most competent person in most rooms, and had organized his entire appearance around reinforcing that impression. Expensive suit. Precise posture. Hands folded on the table in the way of someone who had learned that stillness communicated control. He had an attorney beside him and 2 associates behind him against the wall. He looked at Damien first. Then he looked at Clara. And something happened in his face that was not what Damien expected. It wasn't the calculating assessment of a man identifying a useful piece in a negotiation. It was recognition. Genuine, uncomfortable, complicated recognition. Clara saw it too. Her posture shifted almost imperceptibly. The particular shift of someone who has just received unexpected information through a channel that isn't language. Everyone sat down. Judith opened. She laid out the documentation in the precise and unembellished way she did everything chronological, factual, consequence mapped. She outlined Victor's role and Calder's connection to it. She indicated what was currently in the possession of people with both the authority and the motivation to use it. She did not editorialize. She didn't need to. The facts editorialized for her. Calder listened to all of it. His attorney made 2 small notes. When Judith finished, there was a silence. Then Calder said, "I'd like to speak directly to Mr. Moretti and to Ms. Bennett." His attorney looked like he had mixed feelings about this phrasing. He said nothing. "Go ahead," Damien said. Calder looked at him first. "What Victor built was my idea," he said. "I want to be clear about that. The architecture was mine. The timeline was mine. Victor was the mechanism." He paused. "I'm telling you that because I'm not interested in letting someone else carry the full weight of something I designed." Damien looked at him steadily. Noted. "The properties I want access to," Calder continued, "are worth $240 million in the right development configuration. The blocking your organization has done over 8 years has cost me significantly more than that in opportunity. I made a decision that was wrong. I made it because I was impatient and because I believed that people like you responded better to pressure than to conversation." He paused again. "I was wrong about that too." "You were," Damien said. "I'd like to have the conversation instead," Calder said. Damien studied him. The man across the table was not performing contrition. He wasn't in the posture of someone who had been cornered and was managing the theater of regret. He was in the posture of someone who had done a cold calculation and arrived honestly and without sentiment at the conclusion that the calculation had been wrong. That was not the same as virtue, but it was something you could work with. "Before we talk about properties," Damien said, "you requested that Ms. Bennett be in this room. Explain that." Calder turned to Clara. He looked at her for a moment. "7 years ago," he said, "my daughter was in a car accident on the north side. It was winter, early morning. The car went off the road on a stretch of ashland that wasn't well lit. She was 22 years old. She wasn't injured badly, but she was in shock, and the car was off the road at an angle, and it was 5:30 in the morning and there was almost nobody around." He paused. "Almost nobody." Clara went very still. "A young woman was walking to an early shift," Calder said. "She stopped. She stayed with my daughter for 40 minutes until the paramedics arrived. She held her hand. She talked to her about completely ordinary things, school, her job, a book she was reading, just to keep her calm. She didn't ask for anything. She didn't take a phone number. When the paramedics arrived, she said she needed to get to work, and she left." He looked at Clara. "My daughter described her. I tried to find her for 2 years. I never did." The room was very quiet. "My daughter's name is Sophie," Calder said. "She's 29 now. She's finishing a medical residency at Northwestern. He paused. She still talks about the woman who stopped. Clara's hand was flat on the table. Her face was doing something complex and private that she was managing to keep mostly interior. But Damien was watching, and he caught all of it. The recognition, the effort to hold it, the quality of a person who has just been told that something they did and forgot about something they did, because it was simply the thing to do in the moment, had mattered in a way that traveled further than they knew. "The description my daughter gave me," Calder said quietly. "When I saw your name in the documentation from Victor, it was the same shift, the same stretch of Ashland. I went back and checked." He looked at her. "It was you." Clara looked at him. "She had brown hair," Clara said. "She was in a blue coat. She kept saying her phone was dead and she couldn't call anyone." Calder's composure shifted, very slightly. The crack of a man who had been professional for the entirety of this meeting and has just arrived at the thing that made the meeting personal. "Yes," he said. Clara looked at her hands. "I was late to work that morning," she said, not to him, more to herself, to the memory of it. "My manager was angry." She paused. "I didn't think about it as a decision. She was in a car and she was scared. You don't walk past that." The room was silent. Damien looked at Clara. He thought about what Marco had said on Monday night. That the attack had been aimed at Elena because she was Damien's vulnerability, the thing that moved him in ways that no operational lever could. He thought about Calder sitting across from him with the expression of a man who had built a machine to apply pressure to someone else's vulnerability and had just discovered in the same room that the person caught in that machine had 7 years ago stood on a dark winter street and held his daughter's hand. The geometry of it was almost incomprehensible. "Mr. Calder," Damien said. Calder looked at him. "Tell me what you actually want." Calder straightened. He looked at his attorney briefly, then back at Damien. He had made a decision about something, and the decision was visible in the quality of what came next. "The Meridian Corridor," he said. 3 properties. I've been trying to access them for 8 years through channels that haven't worked. I'd like to make a legitimate proposal. Revenue sharing. Structured development. Your organization retains control over the conditions and the community impact requirements." He paused. "I'm not trying to move you out. I never was. Victor convinced me that was the only path. He was wrong. I was wrong to believe him." Damien looked at him for a long moment. "Why should I believe this is the real version?" he said. "Because the alternative is what I have sitting in front of me," Calder said. "And because I've spent 7 years trying to find the woman who helped my daughter, and she's been sitting in my documentation this week as collateral." He said the last word with something that sounded like contempt directed at himself. "There's a version of this week where that's the thing I'm most ashamed of. I'd like it not to be the only thing." Judith leaned forward. "We'd need full disclosure of the Victor relationship documentation on your end. Complete financial transparency for the past 18 months. Third-party verification of any revenue-sharing structure." "Agreed," Calder's attorney said. "And one more thing," Damien said. Everyone looked at him. "The Bennett Foundation," he said. "It doesn't exist yet. I'm building it. It provides medical and educational support for children from low-income families in Chicago. I'd like a founding contribution from Calder Capital." He held the man's eyes. "Significant. In the range of what an 8-year obstruction costs." Calder's attorney looked at Calder. Calder looked at Damien. Then he looked at Clara. "Yes," he said. Clara made a sound that was not quite anything, not a word, not a breath exactly. Something between the two. The involuntary release of a person who has just heard something they've needed and have been managing the need for so long, they'd stopped expecting to feel the relief of it. She covered it immediately. She was Clara. She pulled it back and looked at the table and composed herself in the 4 seconds it took. But Damien had heard it, and Calder had heard it, and something in Calder's face settled into something that wasn't quite peace, but was in the direction of it. The meeting ran another 90 minutes. Judith was thorough in the way she was always thorough. No ambiguity, no loose language. Everything mapped to a timeline and a consequence. By the time they finished, there was a working framework on the table, a documented commitment on Victor's information, a contribution agreement for the foundation, and a set of next steps with names and dates attached. Calder shook Damien's hand. Then he turned to Clara. "I'd like to tell Sophie," he said, "that I found you, if that's all right." Clara looked at him. "Tell her she's going to be a good doctor," she said. "The fact that she's in a residency instead of just being okay after that accident means she used it for something. That matters." Calder looked at her for a moment. "Yes," he said, "it does." He left. His attorney and associates filed out behind him. The room was quiet. Judith organized her documents with the focused efficiency of someone already thinking about the next 14 steps. She looked up at Damien. "Better than I expected," she said, which from Judith was a standing ovation. "Can you have the framework documented by Monday, Friday?" she said, because Judith did not accept Monday when Friday was possible. She left. Marco stepped out to take a call. Damien and Clara were alone in the conference room. She was still sitting at the table. She had both hands flat on the surface, and she was looking at the middle distance with the expression of someone who has just experienced too many things in too short a period and is organizing them in real time. 7 years, she said. "Yes, I forgot about it." She shook her head. Not because it didn't matter, because there were 1,000 mornings after that, and each one needed its own thing. She paused. That's the strange part. The moments you think will stay with you, they don't always. And the ones you forget are apparently... She stopped. "The ones that traveled," he said. She looked at him. Her eyes were bright in the way that happened before a person cried or decided not to. She decided not to. She pressed her lips together and looked at the table. "The foundation," she said. "You named it before you told me." "I told you about it before I told Judith," he said. "That wasn't accidental." She looked at him. "It's named correctly," he said. "It's not named after me. It's not named after the organization. It's named after what it's supposed to do." He held her eyes. "And I want you to help build it, not as an employee, not as a figurehead, as someone who knows what the inside of the problem looks like." Clara was quiet for a long moment. "Noah's surgery," she said. "Is covered," he said. "Before anything else. That is the first thing the foundation does. I've already spoken to Judith about the structure of it." Her breath caught. Visible. Audible. The involuntary physical response of someone who has been holding a specific weight for so long that the sudden absence of it registers in the body before the mind has processed it. She looked away. Her hand came up to her face. She pressed 2 fingers to her mouth and held very still for 5 seconds. Then she looked back at him. "Thank you," she said. "Don't thank me," he said. "You told me not to make it a transaction. This isn't one. This is the right thing to do. You said yourself that was sufficient reason." She almost smiled. "I said that to you." "You did," he said. "I was paying attention." She looked at him for a long moment, and then she said, "You're different than the person I met on Tuesday night." He thought about that. "No," he said. "I'm the same person. I've just stopped building walls around parts of him." She was quiet. Outside, Chicago was going about its day. 12 floors below them, the street was full of people who had no idea that anything had changed, who were carrying their own weights, running their own calculations, making their $30 payments toward whatever bill was the current impossible thing. The city went on. It always went on. "Elena's going to want to hear all of this," Clara said. "She's going to want to hear it in extensive detail," Damien agreed, "with follow-up questions." "I like her follow-up questions." "Everyone does. It's deeply inconvenient." Clara looked at him with the expression that was closest to a real smile without quite being one. The expression he had catalogued again without meaning to in the 17 ways it appeared depending on what had produced it. This one was the warmest version he'd seen. "Let's go home," she said. The word landed between them. Neither of them addressed it directly, but he noticed it, and she noticed that he noticed it. And they moved toward the door in the specific silence of two people who have both clocked the same thing and agreed without speaking that there will be a time for it, and that time is not right now. Marco was in the hallway. He fell into step beside them as they moved toward the elevator. Judith already sent 3 emails, he said, checking his phone. It's been 11 minutes. That's slow for her, Damien said. One of them has 9 attachments. There it is. They went down. In the lobby, a woman was arguing with the security desk about a visitor badge. A delivery person moved through with a dolly stacked with packages. A group of men in suits were making the sounds that groups of men in suits made when they were about to go into a meeting they'd already mentally concluded. Ordinary. Constant. The specific texture of a city that had no knowledge of and no interest in the fact that 3 people had just walked out of an elevator, having navigated something that had been pointed at them with the intent of destruction. The car was outside. They got in. Elena called at 4:15. She was apparently monitoring the timeline of the meeting with a precision that suggested she'd been checking her phone every 6 minutes since noon. How did it go? She said. Well, Damien said. Define well. Judith used the word better than expected. A sharp intake of breath. That's basically a parade from Judith. What happened? Tell me everything. He told her the broad version. She would get the full version tonight. But he gave her enough that the tension he could hear in her voice unwound into something that breathed more easily. He watched Clara's face while he talked to his sister, watched her look out the window at Chicago, passing by at the ordinary streets and ordinary people carrying ordinary mornings. Is Clara okay? Elena said. He looked at Clara. Yes, he said. Clara looked at him, caught him looking, looked away again with the expression of someone who is not uncomfortable but is being careful about something. Tell her I'm making dinner tonight, Elena said. She doesn't get a vote. I've already decided. He relayed this. Clara turned from the window. What's she making? He asked. Pasta, Elena said. I know how to make exactly one thing. Clara smiled. The real one. He told Elena he'd see her at home. He hung up. The car moved through the city. The silence between them was the comfortable kind, which was a specific achievement given the week it had been built from. Not comfortable in the way of people who have nothing at stake. Comfortable in the way of people who have been through enough together that the silence itself has weight, and the weight is not unpleasant. Can I ask you something? Clara said. Yes. When you were in that meeting, when you decided not to respond to Victor the way he expected. She turned from the window to look at him directly. Was that the first time you'd made that choice to not do the thing that was expected of you in that world? He thought about it honestly. It was the first time it was conscious, he said. I've probably made versions of it before, without knowing I was choosing differently. He paused. Knowing you were in the house made it easier to see what the choice actually was. She looked at him. I didn't do anything, she said. You were there, he said. That was enough. She turned back to the window. A few blocks passed. Then she said very quietly, Noah is going to want to know every detail of this week. He asks questions the same way Elena does. I'm going to be answering things for months. Tell him about the bioluminescence conversation, Damien said. She turned to look at him again. A different expression this time, surprised and a little undone. You remembered that, she said. Anglerfish, he said. The light is the actual remarkable thing. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she looked back out the window. But the smile stayed. It stayed all the way home. Elena had started the water boiling before they even got through the door, which meant she'd been tracking their ETA with the same precision she'd tracked the meeting timeline. She was in the kitchen in an apron that belonged to no one Damien could identify, hair pulled back, the specific expression of someone who has decided that feeding people is the available form of control and is exercising it fully. Sit, she said to Clara. Both of you. You've been in a conference room all day. You need food. I had coffee, Clara said. That's not food. Sit. Clara sat. Damien sat. Elena cooked. She was not technically a skilled cook, but she was an enthusiastic one, and she knew the difference between the two, and compensated for the gap with focus and the willingness to ask for help. She asked Clara twice about timing and once about salt, and listened to the answers with genuine attention. They ate at the kitchen table, not the formal dining room. The kitchen table, which was smaller and older, and had 4 chairs that didn't quite match, which was how it had ended up in the kitchen, rather than anywhere more curated, and which was in Damien's experience the table where every actual conversation in this house had ever happened. Elena wanted the full story. She got it. She listened to all of it. The meeting, the Calder revelation, Sophie's accident, the 7 years, the foundation contribution. The name with the focused and unsentimental attention of someone who understood that the full story mattered more than any edited version. When it was done, she was quiet for a moment. Then she looked at Clara. "Sophie Calder," she said. "She's at Northwestern. Finishing her residency, apparently," Clara said. "Neurology," Elena said. Damien looked at her. "I took a class with someone from her cohort last year," Elena said. "They mentioned her, said she was exceptional." She paused. "They also said she talked about wanting to work in trauma because of something that happened when she was younger, that it changed how she thought about being the person who showed up." She looked at Clara. "That was you." Clara looked at the table. "She became a doctor," she said, quietly, "to no particular person." "She became a trauma doctor," Elena said. The kitchen was quiet. Outside, evening had arrived in the way Chicago evenings arrived in late winter. Fast, definitive, the light shifting to something darker and colder and more itself. The city outside the windows was doing what it always did, which was refuse to be moved by any individual thing happening inside any individual building. But inside this kitchen, with 3 people at a table that didn't match, and a pasta that Elena had slightly oversalted, and a week that had moved from a marble floor to a warehouse, to a conference room, to this moment, something had arrived that didn't have a clean name, but had a recognizable quality. It was the quality of things settling into what they were going to be. Not finished. Not resolved in the way that removed all future difficulty, or cost, or complication, but oriented, pointed towards something real. Elena looked between Clara and Damien. She had the expression of someone who knows exactly what she's looking at and is choosing with some effort not to say all of it out loud. She chose to say only part of it. "I like this," she said. "The pasta," Clara said. "Yes," Elena said. "The pasta too." Clara looked at her. Elena looked back with complete serenity. Damien poured more wine. Later, much later after the dishes, after Elena had fallen asleep on the couch with her laptop open and a half-finished application draft on the screen, after Marco had checked in and confirmed that Victor's formal processing was on track, and Calder's attorney had sent a preliminary agreement to Judith, Damien found Clara in the hallway outside the guest room. She was standing with the paperback in her hand, and the particular expression of someone who has reached the end of a very long day and is only now allowing themselves to feel the full weight of it. He stopped. They stood in the hallway. "How's the shoulder?" he said. "Better," she said. "Actually better, not managing it better." "Good." A pause. "I'm going to call Noah in the morning," she said. "I want to tell him about the surgery myself before anything official comes through." She paused. "He's going to ask how it happened. He's 8. He's going to want the whole story." "What are you going to tell him?" She thought about it. "That someone helped us," she said. "And that before that, someone else decided that helping mattered more than being afraid." She paused. "The beginning of the story is mine. But the rest of it," she looked at him, "the rest of it is yours." He looked at her. In the hallway of his house at the end of the week that had rearranged more than he had anticipated when it started standing 3 feet from a woman who had walked into his world through a marble floor, and a choice that required no calculation. Damien Moretti understood something clearly and for the first time. He was not afraid of what he felt. He was not going to convert it into something useful. He was not going to file it away until the circumstances were different, or the timing was better, or he had found a framework that made it more manageable. He was just going to stand in it. For right now, tonight. "Get some sleep," he said. "Damien," she said. He stopped. She looked at him with the same directness she had looked at him with since the first night. Since the paperback and the worn shoes, and the 4 words because she was scared. The look that had no performance in it, and no agenda, and no calculation. "Thank you," she said, "for choosing differently." He stood with it. "Go to sleep, Clara," he said. She went in. The door closed. He stood in the hallway for a long time. The house made its sounds. The city made its sounds. Elena made the small sounds of someone sleeping on a couch with a laptop they should have taken to bed. And Damien Moretti, who had spent 20 years building himself into someone nothing could reach, stood in a hallway that had somehow become the clearest place he'd ever occupied and understood with the particular quiet certainty of things that were simply true, that the week ahead was going to require him to be still another version of himself. One he hadn't finished building yet, but one that was for the first time worth the work of becoming. Noah Bennett found out on a Friday morning. Clara called him at 8:15 after Mrs. Okafor had given him breakfast, and before he started the reading program, he did every morning without being asked, because that was the kind of child Noah was structured in the way that children became structured when their world had spent years being unpredictable and routine was the thing they could hold on to. He picked up on the second ring. "Clara." His voice was the specific morning voice of an 8-year-old, slightly rough, fully awake, because Noah was always fully awake. "Are you coming home today?" "Soon," she said. "A couple more days. How's your shoulder feeling?" "My shoulder's fine. Yours isn't." She smiled at the ceiling. "I know. Mrs. Okafor made oatmeal with the brown sugar. I saved you some in the container with the blue lid. That's the best thing anyone said to me all week." A pause. "Clara." "Yeah, you're going to tell me something big," he said. "I can hear it." She had rehearsed this conversation 6 times in her head the night before. She had the words organized in the right order. She knew exactly how to say it in a way that was complete and honest without being frightening. She said none of those organized words. She said, "Baby, you're going to get the surgery." Silence. Not the silence of a child who didn't understand. The silence of a child who understood completely and was managing the size of what he understood. "For real," he said. "For real. It's arranged. It's paid for. You don't have to worry about anything except getting better." Another silence. Longer this time. Then very quietly. "How?" "Someone helped us," she said. "Someone who didn't have to, but did. Like you did for that girl." Clara closed her eyes for a moment. "Yes," she said. "Exactly like that." She heard him breathe. She heard him working through it the way he worked through big things, methodically giving each piece of it the space it needed. "Okay," he said finally. The word that in Noah's vocabulary meant, "I've taken this in and I'm going to carry it correctly." "Okay," she said back. "When are you coming home?" 2 days, maybe less." "Okay." A pause. "Clara." "Yeah." "Thank the person," he said, "not just with words. Thank them the way it counts." She pressed her hand over her mouth for a second. "I will," she said. After she hung up, she sat on the edge of the guest room bed for a long time, not crying. Something adjacent to it, the particular stillness of someone whose body has been under sustained pressure for so long that the release of even one major piece of that pressure registers as a physical event. She sat with it for 5 minutes. Then she got up, washed her face, and went downstairs. Damien was already at his desk. Elena was still asleep. The house had the specific quiet of a Friday morning when the week's most urgent things had been handled, and what remained was the necessary work of following through on them. He looked up when she came in. He read her face. "You called him," he said. "He said to thank you the way it counts." She stood in the doorway. "He's 8 years old, and that's what he said." Damien looked at her. "He's going to be fine," he said. "I know," she said. "And then, I know that now in a way, I didn't let myself know it before." She paused. "That's different. Knowing something is real instead of something you're working toward. The weight of it is completely different." He looked at her for a moment. "Coffee's ready," he said. She came in. They sat on opposite sides of the kitchen counter with their mugs, and the morning, and the particular ease that had built between them over a week of impossible things. The kind of ease that could only be made from that specific material. Not comfort, manufactured from pleasant circumstances, but something forged from pressure and honesty and the repeated experience of seeing each other clearly at the worst possible moments and deciding it was all right. "Victor's processing is moving," he said. "Judith's team filed this morning. It'll be public by next week." "How do you feel about that?" "Relieved." He said it without hesitation. Not satisfied, not vindicated. Just relieved that it's going through the right channels instead of the ones I would have used a week ago. He paused. "The channels I would have used a week ago would have been faster. They would have been worse." "Worse for you," she said. "For everyone." She looked at her mug. "What does the organization look like right now without Victor in it?" He had thought about this. He had been thinking about it since Wednesday, running the structural reality of what a 15-year operational relationship looked like when it was removed, what gaps it left, what it revealed about the shape of things that had been held in place partly by the wrong architecture. "Smaller," he said, "which is not the same as weaker." He paused. Victor's access was built into too many things. Pulling it out is going to require rebuilding several of them from scratch. He looked at her. "I think that's actually good. The things that needed Victor to function probably needed to be rebuilt anyway." She looked at him steadily. "You're not scared of that?" "No," he said. And he meant it. The absence of fear in that specific area was new enough that he noticed it as its own thing. "A month ago I would have been. Stability was the thing I protected above everything. Not because stability was the goal, but because I'd confused the protection of the structure with the protection of the people inside it." He paused. "Victor showed me the difference." "Victor showed you a lot of things," she said. "He did." He looked at his mug. "I'm not going to be grateful to him for that. But I'm not going to waste what it taught me either." Clara nodded. Then Elena appeared in the doorway in his oversized sweatshirt, and her hair doing what Elena's hair did in the mornings, which was assert its own agenda independent of any intention. And she looked at the two of them at the counter and said with the serenity of someone who had spent the night processing everything and arrived at a position of complete clarity, "I've decided I'm taking a gap semester." Damien set down his mug. "No," he said. "Yes." She came to the counter and poured coffee. "I've already thought about it. The applications aren't due until spring. I have time, and there's something here I want to be part of." She looked between them. "The foundation. I want to help build it. I have a business background, I have connections at 3 universities, and I've spent my entire life inside the problem you're trying to solve from the outside." She looked at Damien specifically. "I know what it's like to be the person who's protected. I want to be the person who does the protecting for a change." The kitchen was quiet for a moment. Damien looked at his sister. 20 years old. Gray dress and 2 high heels and stolen bites from his plate and the same blanket since she was 12. The person he had organized everything around protecting for so long that he had sometimes confused the protection with the person. "1 semester," he said. "We'll see," she said. "Elena, we'll see," she said again with the specific serenity of someone who had already won and was allowing the other party to arrive at that conclusion in their own time. Clara was looking at her coffee and doing the thing where she almost smiled. "Don't encourage her," Damien said. "I didn't say anything," Clara said. "You didn't have to." Elena sat down and looked at Clara with the directness that was her most consistent characteristic. "When do I get to meet Noah?" "When I get home," Clara said. 2 days. Maybe less. I could come with you. Clara looked at her. Elena, not to impose, just to... She stopped. He's been through a lot. So have you. I thought maybe having someone extra around while you settle back in would be... She stopped again. Something moved through her face that was more honest than the practical framing she'd been reaching for. I don't want you to disappear, she said. Back into the regular life where we don't know each other. I don't want that to be how this ends. The kitchen was very quiet. Clara looked at her for a long moment. It's not how it ends, she said. Promise? Elena? Clara's voice was gentle and direct, and completely certain. You're not getting rid of me. I've agreed to help build something your brother is dismantling half his life to create. You're going to see more of me than you probably want. Elena smiled. The real one. The one that had its mother's shape, which Damien could see even though he was the only person in the room who had known their mother, and the recognition of it landed softly and without sadness for the first time in a long time. Good, Elena said. The day moved. Judith called at 11 with 3 updates and 4 questions. Marco came by at 1 with the final documentation package from the warehouse clean and indexed, ready for submission. Damien's attorney for the Meridian Corridor properties called at 2 to say that Calder's team had delivered the preliminary agreement, and it was in her words serious and workable. Damien read it for 40 minutes. He called Judith. Judith called Calder's attorney. The framework held. At 3 something happened that none of them had anticipated. Damien's phone rang and the name on the screen was Sophie Calder. He looked at it for a full 3 seconds before he answered. Mr. Moretti, she said. Her voice was steady and professional, and about 20 years older than her age, which was the particular quality that medicine produced in people who were good at it. I'm sorry to call directly. My father gave me your number. I hope that's all right. It is, he said. I wanted to... She stopped, started again. My father told me about Ms. Bennett, about who she is, about what she did at the restaurant. A pause. And about what she did 7 years ago on Ashland. Another pause. I've been carrying that morning for a long time. I didn't know who she was and I couldn't find her, and I eventually made a kind of peace with not knowing. Her voice was controlled the way medical training made voices controlled, but underneath it something was moving. I'd like to talk to her, if she's willing. Damien was quiet for a moment. Hold on, he said. He went to find Clara. She was in the living room with Elena. Both of them on the couch, Elena's laptop open between them, while Clara read the draft of her application essay and made notes in the margin in pencil, because Elena had insisted on printing it on paper for this specific purpose. Damien held out the phone. Sophie Calder, he said. Clara looked at the phone. Something moved through her face. Not reluctance, not quite, but the expression of someone about to enter an emotionally significant space and taking one breath first. She took the phone. She said, "Hello." Damien went to stand by the window, far enough to give her privacy, close enough because the room was the room, and he wasn't going to pretend he was somewhere else. He heard the shape of the conversation without most of the words. He heard Clara say yes, and then something quieter. He heard her laugh once, a small sound surprised. He heard her say, I didn't think about it in the specific tone she used for that phrase. The tone of absolute honesty that meant the sentence was exactly true. He heard her say, that's the best possible thing you could have done with it. Then a longer pause. Then, you're going to be good at it. I can tell from how you're talking right now. Another pause. Then quietly, thank you for finding me. She was quiet for a while after she hung up. Elena, who had remarkable instincts about when to fill a silence and when to leave it alone, left this one alone and looked at her application essay with focused attention. Damien stayed by the window. Clara set the phone on the cushion beside her. Then she said to no particular person, she's doing her trauma rotation right now. She said the reason she chose trauma is because the morning on Ashland, the thing that helped her most wasn't the practical stuff, it was that someone stayed. Someone was present. She paused. She said she thinks about that every time she walks into a trauma bay, about what it means to just stay. The room was quiet. She's going to be extraordinary, Clara said. She already is, Elena said without looking up from the essay. Clara looked at her. Elena looked up. Something passed between them, that specific language they had developed over the past week, that operated entirely without words, the language of two people who had arrived at each other through unusual circumstances and discovered to the surprise of both that they made sense together. Damien watched it. He thought about the chain of it. Clara on a dark street in winter, staying with a frightened girl. That girl becoming a doctor who stayed with frightened people. A foundation being built now that would stay with families in the specific moments when no one else did. The way one choice made in 4 seconds on a cold morning with no calculation and no reward had traveled further than anyone standing inside it could have mapped. He thought about what Clara had said to Noah. Someone helped us. Someone who didn't have to but did. He thought about the fact that the chain didn't start with him. It started with her. It had always started with her. He turned from the window. "I need to show you something," he said to Clara. She looked at him. He went to the office. She followed. He opened the laptop on his desk and turned it toward her. It was the foundation's preliminary structure. Judith had sent it over that morning, not final, not official, but complete enough to show the architecture. The Medical Support Division, the Educational Scholarship Fund, the Emergency Family Assistance Program, the community partnership structure that would eventually grow into something larger. And at the top of the document, where the name of the founding director was indicated with a placeholder, Judith had typed TBD pending conversation. Clara looked at the screen for a long time. "This is real," she said. Not a question. "It's been real since I called Judith Thursday morning," he said. "I've been waiting to show you the full structure until it had enough shape to be honest about." She looked at the document. Her eyes moved through it the way she read everything thoroughly without rushing, taking in the actual content rather than performing the act of reading. "The Emergency Assistance Program," she said. "The cap per family is too low," he said. "I know. That's a first-year constraint. Judith believes we can double it by year 2 if the Calder contribution is structured correctly and we bring in 2 additional founding partners she has in mind." Clara looked at him. "You've already thought about year 2. "I've thought about year 5, he said. She was quiet for a moment. "The director position," she said, "is yours if you want it," he said. "But I want to be clear about what it actually is. Not a title, not a courtesy appointment. The person who runs this has real authority over program structure and spending priorities and partnership decisions. It's a real job with real weight." He paused. "I think you know what that weight feels like from the inside better than anyone I could find." She looked at the screen. "I've been a waitress," she said. "For my entire adult life, I've been a waitress. You've been someone who understood what people needed and provided it before they finished asking," he said. The job title was incidental. She looked at him. "That's a generous reading," she said. "It's an accurate one," he said. "I've been watching you operate in a crisis all week. I know exactly what I'd be getting." The office was quiet. Outside, the afternoon had shifted into the particular late winter light that Chicago produced in February, pale and clean and honest, about its own coldness, without apology or pretense. "I want Noah to be stable first," she said. "The surgery, the recovery, all of it. I want him on the other side of that before I commit to something this significant. Of course. And I want to understand the structure fully, not just the document. The relationships, the board who has authority over what. I've worked for enough organizations where the official structure and the actual structure were different things. I need to know, this one is what it says it is. Judith will walk you through every layer of it. Whatever you need." She nodded. "And one more thing," she said. He waited. I need you to understand that if I do this, I'm doing it because I believe in it. Not because I feel I owe you something. Not because of the surgery, or the week, or any of the—" She stopped. "Not because of any of the other things." He looked at her. "I know," he said. "Good," she said. She looked at the screen one more time. "Okay," she said. He let out a breath. "Okay," he said. She reached out and closed the laptop. She looked at him. Then she said in a completely different register, quieter and more direct, "There's something else you want to say." He looked at her. "I've watched you manage what you want to say all week," she said. "You're very good at it, but you're not that good at it." She met his eyes. "Whatever it is, you can say it." He stood across the desk from her. He thought about the hallway outside the guest room on 4 separate nights. The kitchen at 3 in the morning. The conference room after Calder left. The particular accumulation of a week's worth of moments that had each been not quite the right one, and had somehow added up to a person he recognized as someone he didn't want to be without. "I'm not going to say it in this office," he said. She tilted her head. "Then where?" "Somewhere that isn't a week of crisis," he said. "Somewhere that's just where things are. After all of this." He held her eyes. "I'd like to take you somewhere that isn't my house or a conference room or a hospital, and have a conversation that isn't about Victor or Calder or the foundation or the surgery. And I'd like to do that when Noah is on the other side of the surgery and you've had enough time to know what your life looks like when it's not under pressure." He paused. "And then I'd like to say what I want to say." Clara looked at him for a long moment. "That's very careful," she said. "You deserve careful," he said. "Not rushed, not tangled up in everything that's happened this week." She was quiet. "All right," she said. "All right." "Ask me," she said. "When the time is right, ask me." He nodded. She went back to the living room. He stood in the office for a moment. Something settled in him that was different from resolution, lighter than resolution. The particular quality of something that has been decided and is now simply waiting for its moment, which is entirely different from the pressure of something unresolved. He had spent his adult life converting every unresolved thing into something that demanded immediate action. This he was going to let be what it was. Patient. He was going to let himself be patient with this. He went back to the living room. Elena had apparently taken over the essay editing process and was now 3 paragraphs deep in suggestions, and Clara was listening to her with the expression of someone who had fully surrendered to the process and found it against initial expectation actually useful. Damien sat on the chair across from them. Elena looked up briefly. "You look better," she said. "You said that this morning. You look better than this morning." She went back to the essay. "Whatever you said to each other in there, it worked." "Elena," Clara said. "I'm just noting it," Elena said serenely. "I'm very observant." "You're impossible," Damien said. "You keep saying that. I think you mean it affectionately." Clara looked at her essay and did the thing where she didn't quite smile. Outside, the day continued to do what it always did in Chicago in late winter, announce its coldness with complete confidence and refuse to apologize for it. The city moved as it always moved without ceremony. Traffic. Sound. The particular urban constant of a place that had been going since before any of its current residents and would keep going after. But the house was warm, and the 3 people in it had over the course of 1 week become something that none of them had been before. Not a family in the traditional sense, not a structure that had a name anyone could point to. Something more improvised than that, more specific, built from particular materials that could only have come from this particular week and would not have assembled any other way. The next 6 weeks moved fast. Noah's surgery was scheduled for the 3rd week of February. Clara went home to him the following Sunday, and Damien drove her himself, which was not planned, but happened the way things happened, when the right thing was obvious before anyone consciously decided it. Noah answered the door. He was 8 years old, and he had his sister's eyes and a book under one arm that was clearly about deep-sea creatures, and he looked at Damien with the specific assessment of a child who was not going to pretend to trust someone just because his sister did, that had to be earned separately on its own terms. "You're Damien," Noah said. "I am," Damien said. "Clara said you're helping us." "I'm trying to." Noah studied him for a moment. "Why?" he said. It was the same question his sister had asked in the guest room 11 days ago, and it had the same quality of complete seriousness, the genuine inquiry of someone who didn't accept the obvious answer because they knew the obvious answer was never the whole thing. "Because your sister did something for someone I love," Damien said, "and because what she did showed me something I needed to see." He paused. "And because you deserve the chance to study bioluminescent fish without a medical bill sitting on top of it." Noah looked at him for a long moment. "Anglerfish are the most underappreciated fish in the ocean," he said. "Your sister mentioned that," Damien said. "Most people focus on the teeth," Noah said. "She mentioned that too." Noah appeared to find this satisfactory. He stepped back and let him in. Clara, standing 2 feet away, looked at Damien over her brother's head with an expression he had not seen from her before. Something completely unguarded. Something that was not managing itself or calibrating itself or being careful. He held it for exactly 1 second. Then he followed Noah inside. The surgery happened on a Tuesday. Damien sat in the waiting room for 4 hours. Not because he had been asked to, because it was inconceivable to him to be anywhere else. Elena came at hour 2 and sat beside him and didn't say much because she understood without being told that this was not a situation that needed words. Marco texted twice to handle things that normally would have required a call. Damien handled them in the waiting room without moving. When the surgeon came out and said it went well, Clara's hand found Damien's before she registered that she'd moved it. She held on for about 5 seconds. Then she registered it, and her hand started to pull back, and his closed around it before she could complete the motion. He held on. She let him. Neither of them said anything. Neither of them needed to. Noah's recovery took 3 weeks. In those 3 weeks, Elena came to visit 4 times, which was 2 more times than anyone had suggested, and exactly the right number. She brought books about deep-sea creatures on the second visit because she had apparently done research, and Noah's assessment of her shifted from polite tolerance to active appreciation in approximately 45 minutes of conversation about cephalopods, which was, as Elena later told Damien, genuinely one of the best conversations she'd had all year. Judith completed the foundation's legal structure on February 28th. The Bennett Family Foundation became official on March 1st. Clara signed the director agreement on March 3rd. She signed it at the kitchen table in Noah's apartment, with Noah watching from across the table and eating cereal and asking questions about what each section meant with the systematic thoroughness of a child who had decided this was important enough to understand completely. When she finished signing, he said, "Does this mean you're going to help other families like us?" "That's exactly what it means," she said. He nodded. He looked at his cereal for a moment. Then he said, "Good, because we needed help, and most people didn't stop." He looked up. "The ones who stop should help more people stop." Clara looked at him. "Yes," she said. "That's exactly right." The Foundation's first community event was in April. A Saturday morning at a community center on the south side that the Moretti organization had owned for 3 years and had been using for storage. It had taken 6 weeks and 40 conversations and 1 very detailed argument with a building contractor to turn it into something usable. Elena had managed most of the conversion process with the focused intensity she brought to everything she committed to and had been right about nearly every decision she made, which she was gracious enough not to point out more than twice. The event was simple. Not a gala, not a launch party, not any of the things that organizational launches usually were. Just families. Information about the programs. People who had been inside the problem talking to other people who were still inside it. Clara ran it. She stood at the front of the room and she talked not from notes, not from a prepared script, but from the place that had been forming in her over the past several months, the place where what she knew from living it met what she was building to address it. She talked about Noah. She talked about the cost of a hospital waiting room, not financially, but in the toll it took on a person's sense of what was possible and what wasn't. She talked about the moment she'd had in February, when something shifted from working toward to knowing it was real. She didn't talk about the restaurant. She didn't talk about Damien by name. But at one point, a woman in the third row raised her hand and asked, "What made this happen? What was the starting point?" Clara looked at her. "Someone chose not to walk past something difficult," she said. "And then someone else made the same choice. And then someone else." She paused. "It's always that simple and always that hard. The chain is just people deciding to stop." After the event, when the room had emptied and the chairs were being stacked, and Elena was deep in conversation with a woman from the neighborhood about a partnership opportunity she'd identified at exactly the wrong moment for the other woman to exit it, Damien found Clara by the window. She was standing the way she sometimes stood when something had gone well. Not triumphant, not deflated, but in the quiet that followed a significant effort, the particular rest of someone who had given something real and was letting the giving be enough for the moment. He stood beside her. They were quiet for a moment. "You were right," he said. She looked at him. "About the starting point," he said. "It was always that." She looked at him for a long moment. "Ask me," she said quietly. He looked at her. She looked back. Noah was across the room helping stack chairs with the careful, focused attention he brought to everything. Physical, still rebuilding his strength, 3 weeks post-surgery, not pushing beyond what he could do, but not accepting less either. Elena was still talking to the woman from the neighborhood. Marco was near the door. The room smelled like coffee and the particular smell of a space that had just been full of people. "I've been thinking about what I wanted to say since the hallway outside your room," Damien said. "The first night. When you said don't be afraid, and I heard it from the other side of the room." He held her eyes. "I've been constructing the right version of this for months, and I've come to understand that there is no right version. There's just what's true." Clara said nothing. "What's true is that the week I met you dismantled something I had spent 20 years building," he said. "And I'm not talking about the organization, or Victor, or any of the operational things. I'm talking about the version of myself I thought was the only available version." He paused. "You didn't try to change it. You didn't argue with it. You just were something so different that the comparison made it impossible to keep pretending the wall was necessary." She was very still. "I've waited," he said. "Noah is through the surgery. You've built something real. You know what your life looks like without the pressure now." He held her eyes. "I'd like to be part of what it looks like. Not as the person who helps. Not as the foundation or the circumstance. As someone who shows up. Consistently. Because you've become the clearest thing in my life. And I've been careful about saying so because you deserve the space to choose this without obligation." The room around them continued being what it was. People finishing things. Elena talking. Noah carrying a chair that was slightly too big for him and managing it anyway. Clara looked at him for a long time. "You've been patient," she said. "You told me to ask when the time was right." "It's right," she said. He looked at her. She looked back. "Yes," she said. One word. The same word she'd said in the office the day she agreed to direct the foundation. But completely different in texture, in weight, in what it cost, and what it opened. "Yes," she said again, more quietly. "Just for him." He exhaled. She looked at Noah across the room. "He's going to be unbearably smug about this," she said. "He's 8. He's been rooting for you since the waiting room." She looked at Damien. "He told me you had a good face. He said you could tell a lot about a person by whether they sit in a waiting room or pace. You sat." "I sat for 4 hours." He noticed every minute of it. She paused. So did I. From across the room, Noah looked up from the chair he was managing. He looked at them. He looked back down. But not before Damien saw clearly and unmistakably the expression on the face of an 8-year-old boy who had been paying attention to this particular situation for significantly longer than anyone had given him credit for, and was now entirely satisfied with its resolution. Elena appeared at Damien's elbow from nowhere. "Did it happen?" she said. "Elena," Damien said. "I'm asking Clara." Clara looked at her. "Yes," she said. Elena made a sound that was not quite a word. She put her hand over her mouth. Her eyes went bright in the way that happened when Elena Moretti felt something she hadn't braced for. "Finally," she said. "We've known each other 4 months," Clara said. "I know, finally." Elena squeezed Clara's good arm. "I've been watching you two circle around each other since February, and it has been very difficult to stay out of it." "You've been impossible," Damien said. "Affectionately," Elena said, with the serenity of someone who was entirely right and knew it. Across the room, Noah had finished with the chairs. He walked over. He stood in front of Damien. He looked up at him with the complete directness that was so specifically his sister's that Damien almost smiled at the inheritance of it. "You're going to take care of her," Noah said, not a question. "Yes," Damien said. "And she's going to take care of you," Noah said. "Yes," Clara said. Noah considered this for a moment. "Good," he said. "That's the correct version." He walked away to get his jacket. Elena covered her mouth again. Damien looked at Clara. Clara looked at Damien. Outside Chicago was doing what Chicago always did, moving constant, unimpressed by the specific human moments happening inside any of its buildings, indifferent to the fact that inside a community center on the south side, a chapter of something had just closed, and a different chapter had begun with the simplest possible word said twice. But something had changed. Not in the city, not in the world. In the specific and irreplaceable way that things change when one person looks at another and says yes, and means every version of it. Yes to the difficulty. Yes to the cost. Yes to the truth of it. Yes to the version of themselves that has been waiting on the other side of every wall they built, and every choice they avoided, and every moment they kept saying, "Not yet." Chicago didn't stop for them. It never stopped for anyone. But the people walking out of that community center in April, a man who had finally chosen to be someone worth choosing. A woman who had never stopped being exactly who she was. A 20-year-old girl who had wanted one normal dinner and gotten something she hadn't known to ask for. And a small boy with a book under his arm who had been paying attention all along. Those people carried something with them that the city moved around without touching. The kind of thing that started because one woman chose not to walk past something difficult. The kind of thing that spread because another person saw it and decided to do the same. The kind of thing that could not be taken from the people who had built it because it was not made from power or money or the protection of walls. It was made from the only material that holds. The decision to stop. The decision to stay. The decision to say to someone who is afraid, "I'm here." And to mean it not just in the moment, but in every moment after, in the long and ordinary and irreplaceable mornings of a life rebuilt from that single act of staying. That was what Clara Bennett had offered in 40 seconds on a marble floor in a restaurant where nobody important had ever noticed her. And it was in the end, the most powerful thing anyone in that story had ever done.